saying that many of my claims about
Heyo everybody, what's up? Tom here, back at you with another video. We're back. Anyway. I'm so tempted to migrate my character over to a trade character. I'm so tempted because, oh my god, my defenses are brutal. But I haven't unlocked essences yet. I'm going to try to at least farm essences to get some better gear. So, I can at least do that. Essence plus Abyss is a pretty strong combo. You can get some pretty disgusting items with that combo. So that's my goal. I'm gonna at least farm essences for a day or two. I don't know how people get through this game so quickly. Maybe I'm just a dumbass. I'm gonna have 1,300 hours in this game, going on 1,400. The wolf is squishy. Everybody always said the wolf is squishy. And I am doing massive damage, especially to bosses. It's just fucking abyss mobs that fuck me. Anyway, we've got a corrupted zone here, so I do think I want to hit this one. Alright, we're gonna pop a map. Temporal chains. Here, let's do that. So I gotta hit one corrupted nexus, and then I believe I'll be getting some essence stuff at that point. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yep.
Not afraid of a little mud.
what one can realize through meditation. I think in particular that the illusoriness of the self, that those were kind of merely subjective claims that I was kind of trumping up into some greater than rational status as objective claims, right? Like there's a path by which I'm seeking to make credible claims about the nature of human subjectivity is not one that can actually be walked, because all it really is a matter of personal experience or personal opinion down that path. I mean, introspection on some level can't bear objective fruit. And I would just challenge that. I mean, what's happening, what I heard happening in your description, I mean, you might want to just give your criticism again so that our listeners can hear it. But what seemed to be happening for me is that you were confusing the linguistic claims for the reality indicated, right? Like, yes, when talked about, it is just language, right? These are just small mouth noises that I'm making now, and anything I say about the nature of mind is just going to be a string of sentences. But what I'm talking about isn't just at bottom a string of sentences, and there are features of the mind that we can only experience directly from a first-person side, about which we can nevertheless make objective claims, right? These are not merely subjective claims, not merely biased, not merely personal. There's a functionally infinite number of things you can say about the mind from a first-person point of view, which are nonetheless objective, not epistemologically objective, while ontologically subjective.
I think I got lost somewhere there, Chris. Sorry, and it's partly that I'm a little bit vague about the crux of the issue.
Well, let me just sharpen that up with a couple of claims. So, for instance, I mean, it may sound hyperbolic for me to say you can make an infinite number of claims about the mind, the subjectivity of people that are nevertheless objective, but you obviously can, right? So, for instance, I can say, what was John F. Kennedy thinking the moment he got assassinated, right? Well, we don't know, but there's an infinite number of things he wasn't thinking, and we can rule those out absolutely, right? He was not attempting to factor the largest prime number human beings have discovered in the years since, right? He wasn't thinking about string theory. He wasn't thinking about what a genius Edward Witten is, right? He just add your propositions that he was not entertaining, ad libitum. It's just, these are objective claims about his mind, right? We know what these are things that we can rule out, right? So we're talking about his subjectivity. We're talking about what it was like to be him from a first person point of view, and we're making claims about what wasn't there, right, in his conscious mind. And so that's just one way to see that you can make objective claims about subjective states of mind without any doubt.
Engaging in introspective practices, I would concede that there are basic experiences that the nature of the way that human minds operate, that if somebody is to engage in introspective practices in a certain way, that they will very likely have those experiences, right? And I think that accords with what you're saying about being able to make statements that are objectively true, or that you can introspect and see for yourself. If it's easy to not make thoughts about the future and past arise in your mind when you just sit, right? It would be very strange if somebody sat down and said, "Oh, I had no problem doing that," right? That you'd met a quite interesting person in that case. But from there are plenty of different introspective traditions and spiritual, religious, philosophical practices that investigate mind using introspective practices and arrive at rather different conclusions about the nature of mind. Now, there are mystics and comparative religious people who have tried to argue that they're essentially just grasping the elephant from all different points, but the conclusions of a transcendental meditation practitioner and a Dzogchen Buddhist are often different because, in part, of the framing that those traditions have provided to help interpret those experiences. And our argument, I think, is that you, like all people who engage in those practices, have inherited a particular interpretive framework, which you tend to present as reflecting a kind of universal insight that people from any tradition could have.
No, it's universal. Just to be like, it's universal if it's true, right? So I fully agree with you that there are different traditions and they don't totally agree. And from my point of view, the various traditions are more or less cluttered with concepts. Some concepts are more useful than others. Some teachings, I do somewhat take the Buddhist view that some teachings are more appropriate for different sorts of people. So there's a kind of a skillful means argument that some of these seeming differences of opinion can be reconciled with differences of skillful means depending on the audience. But I think there are maps that fit the territory better than others. But there is a territory, right? There are certain, you're talking at the leading edge. Yes, there might be differences of opinion. And there's certainly differences with respect to the metaphysical picture suggested by the experiences that practitioners have. And I'm very slow to draw any metaphysical conclusions from any experience. I'm I'm fairly skeptical about, all of that. So, I don't tend to talk like Deepak Chopra and say that because you experienced this thing in the darkness of your closed eyes, you now know something about cosmology, right? So these are what I claim is that we can make objective claims about the nature of experience, not about the nature of the cosmos, on the basis of meditation. And there are many claims that there would be no disagreement about, really, no matter how different the traditions are. Like, for instance, that thoughts arise and pass away, right? Your thoughts are not permanent. You think there's this experience of, first there was that particular thought of what you ate for lunch yesterday wasn't there a moment ago, and now it's there, and there it's gone, right? So there's a transitory quality to the flow of thought, right? To each increment of thought that you can think about distinctly, or experience distinctly. So anyone who's claiming that doesn't happen and thoughts are permanent, that would be an odd person to have a conversation with, right? It's almost like saying that sounds are permanent, right? Or sentences are permanent. All right, this sentence eventually comes to an end, period, full stop. So does the analogous thought. But there's certain things follow from that, right? I mean, so if you can notice the transitory nature of mental objects, thoughts included, and emotions, right? A state of anger, it can't be permanent, right? Because it wasn't there a moment ago. Whatever physiology that constitutes it in this moment is by the sheer fact that it arose, it will prove impermanent. It's not going to be there for a week and a half, right? It's not even going to be there for an hour. It's not even going to be there. So, and here we get closer to an objective claim that's kind of interesting and certainly psychologically useful. The claim is that it's not going to be there for even minutes unless you get lost in thought about the reasons why you're angry again. So you can't sustain the emotional reaction of anger for more than orders of seconds or tens of seconds, I would claim, unless you get lost in thought in a very dreamlike way, identified with thought about why you're angry, right? And so that is, this is the first useful thing I've said from a meditative point of view. That offers a key to how you can become free of anger if you want to be. You can notice the linkage between thought and emotion and break the connection. You can notice thoughts as thought and how they're impermanent. You can notice the physiology of anger and how it's impermanent. And you can continually break the spell of identification with thought and notice that the half-life, that an emotion like anger has a certain half-life and is very, very brief, right? Astoundingly brief. And there's liberation from anger to be found in that. Again, this is anyone adequate to the task of observing this, right? And not everybody is, and it takes a little training to become so, can converge on an agreement about the nature of this experience, right? And anyone who says, oh no, that's complete bullshit. Whenever I get angry, it lasts for 17 hours, and I'm not thinking at all at that time, I know that person is unable to witness certain things about them, about what it's like to be them, based on just a lack of facility or a lack of training. And you can know that every bit as much as you can know, that somebody, claiming to run a 3-minute mile is just, he's got a broken stopwatch, right? It's just not happening, right?
Sam, I might jump in and reply. I'm a little bit vague on exactly what my issue was too. I think it partly could be the idea of pointing to subjective experience and, like, for instance, the benefits you experience from meditation as the kind of evidence for a particular way of looking at things. And I don't dispute that may well be true. I've got nothing against meditation. I'm all for self-reflection. I'm all for taking a pause, practicing a bit of self-awareness, especially the way you just phrased it then. It's just good advice, right? It's homespun wisdom, perhaps, in some ways, but that's the kind of advice I'd give to, like, a young person, for instance, who was a bit emotional and not practicing a bit of self-reflection. The problem is when we point to our own subjective experiences, right? Like the immense calmness and groundedness that we're experiencing by doing X, then ultimately other people have to take it on faith a little bit, right? Unless they do the thing that we're telling them to do. So in terms of epistemology or whatever, it's not fundamentally that different from the revealed truth that a mystic doing any other kind of thing, saying that he's getting messages from God or pulling them out of a hat or something like that.
Well, no, it's quite different.
Elegant.
It's quite different because, again, I'm not making that the lurch into metaphysics, right? If you're claiming to be hearing the voice of God, right? Now you might be claiming to hear voices, and that can be an honest claim about which I really wouldn't doubt. If someone said to me, listen, I hear a voice and it's not my own. Well, then we're talking about schizophrenia, or we're talking about, something. But the claim that this is the voice of God is a metaphysical claim. It's a claim about the relationship between this person's subjectivity and other entities in the cosmos, and it's testable, right? So, like, if I wanted to test whether someone was actually hearing the voice of an omniscient being, I would ask that voice a few questions, right? And that it's provable. The person could give me answers of a sort that would prove that they're in contact with some kind of superhuman intelligence, right? I could write down on a piece of paper a 15-digit number, and known only to me, not even known to me because I can't even remember it. I just wrote it down and I've forgotten it, right? And it's in my desk. Tell me what that number is, right? If the person can tell me what that number is based on this voice they're hearing, okay, I'm all ears. Let's talk about the miraculous situation we're in, right? So all of this is amenable to testing. The claim I'm making, and I think that the claim that you were most uncomfortable with was not so much like the impermanence of thought or the impermanence of emotion, which seems kind of this remedial self-help technique, but the spookier claim that the ego is an illusion, right? The sense of there being a subject in the center of consciousness is an illusion. And I will admit that's a claim I'm making that is not just for me, and it's not just for people who agree with me. It's for you, whether you realize it or not, right? So it's there's a kind of it's an intrusive claim. It purports to be objective, and the analogy I would give, which I've given before, and perhaps even on your podcast, is to the optic blind spot, right? So I have a story as to why the optic blind spot is there to be noticed. I also have a story as to why it's hard to notice and why most people don't notice it, and it requires a little training to notice it. And some people also notice it and it's not even interesting, or it's like, so what, right? All of that maps on to the territory of so-called self-transcendence, or noticing the illusoriness of the self rather faithfully, right? It's neuroanatomically plausible that this would be true. And it's, as is the case with the optic blind spot, it's hard to notice, arguably harder to notice with respect to meditating on the illusoriness of the self. And it can be noticed and then overlooked again, right? And it's in the same way that the blind spot can. But it's an objective claim in the same way. The only difference is it's a little bit harder, in some cases maybe a lot harder to confirm. And I can't easily say, we can't use a piece of paper and a pencil to do it in a way that is super reliable, because it is harder, right? And that's just an accident of the just what it takes to notice this thing.
I think something that might tighten up the disagreement here is that when I've heard you present this, you tend to frame it that people, they don't like the thought of not having a permanent self, right? It's a kind of challenge to most people's notions of identity.
Yeah, some people, yeah.
Yeah, but if they engage in the practice, they'll come to see that. And I had and have an interest in introspective practices. I focused on Buddhist traditions for my initial studies because of an interest in that, which I think mirrors a lot of the interest that you had, when younger as well, and you've retained the interest. But whenever I engaged in introspective practices, whenever I use your app as well, most of the things about the self that you point out about, that when people try to grasp that idea of a little homunculus, it falls apart on observation, right? But I agree with pretty much all of the kind of insights that you can gain from introspective practices about the way that the minds are operating and the narratives that they're constructing and so on. But I haven't reached the same conclusion as you or a lot of Buddhists in regard the notion that self is non-existent, except to say that the popular conception of self is non-existent. But there are aspects, because like you can focus on an individual moment and kind of go down the layers of analysis until you get to the level of atoms, and then say, well, where's the actual person, right? It's just vibrating forces around. And in the same way, you can go through thought processes down to the individual thoughts and, you know, reactions in the individual arising moments in consciousness. But the patterns in the brain and like the way that it's structured, life experiences are consistent patterns over time, right? That's why we have personalities. That's why we have autobiographical memories. And to me, saying that the sense or autobiographical sense is a complete illusion is it sounds
that's
more.
not what I'm saying, though. Part of the confusion might be on what self are we talking about, right? So there are many ways we can use the term self, and there's really only one that I'm claiming is illusory, right? I mean, the others are you might say are constructed. They might not be what they seem either, right? I mean, like they're subjective to they're subject to a kind of deflationary analysis of the sort you just suggested, right? So if you look at it, you know, any object closely enough, it resolves into its constituent parts, and you know the object itself is not in any of the parts, right? And so there's this sort of mirage-like quality to everything that we decompose. And so everything is just this is a Buddhist trope. I mean, going back to a famous sutta, the questions of King Milinda, where he was asking Nagasena, the monk was asking, you know, is a chariot in the wheel, in the axle, in the rope, in the carriage, in the seat? And you know, you can't find a chariot in any of the chariot parts, and you bring all the parts together and you have a chariot. And the question is, like, at what point do we actually get a chariot? I mean, you can talk about a chariot without an axle, but you really can't talk about a chariot without a wheel, an axle, a carriage, and every other chariot part. And so it is with any aggregate thing. You can imagine a person missing a hand, but you can't really imagine a person missing, 100 different parts and still be a person. I'm not saying that people are illusions, right? I'm not saying that it's mysterious that you have your memories and I have my memories, and why don't I wake up tomorrow with all of your memories, right? Like that. That's not so that like there's no mystery about personal identity of that sort. The self that is illusory, that is in fact spurious, that doesn't survive analysis, and that you can actually experience to be absent, is the self as the presumed subject of experience, right? So again, and forgive me, I feel like we must have had this almost an identical conversation of this sort last time, but I mean, just to remind you and your listeners, the claim is that most of us, certainly most of us, perhaps not all of us, but most of us, most of the time, feel like, certainly prior to any real experience with meditation, feel like we don't feel identical to our experience, right? We feel like we're having experience almost from some place outside of experience or on the edge of experience, right? There's this feeling of being a subject, a locus of consciousness, an aimer of attention. And if you're talking about action, a willer of will, this entity that has free will, right? The whole free will conversation is just the other side of this coin, right? The feeling of agency. It's me here doing these things. I'm pushing these sentences out, right? I'm having thoughts. I'm the thinker of my thoughts, and I'm the doer of my doings, right? And I'm, if I'm going to reach for something, I'm the motive force. As the subject. And so there's this sense that there's an observer, right? It's almost like you're looking over your own shoulder into the theater of your experience, and then there's the things you experience. You have sights and sounds and sensations and thoughts and emotions, and it's all changing. And yet there's this something static about the subject, right? There's almost a sense that there's an unchanging subject that gets carried through moment to moment. That subject, the feeling that there's a man in the boat, right, or that you're on the bank of the river, watching the river of consciousness flow by, that is the illusion. And when you look for that subject clearly enough, precisely enough, if you're attentive enough to what it's actually like to look for the one who is looking, right? You can kind of, there's a subjectively speaking, there's a needle to thread here. And it is, again, somewhat analogous to looking for the optic blind spot under the right conditions. You can confirm for yourself the absence of data. I mean, just as if I give you the piece of paper and with the 2 marks on it, and you stare at one, you stare at the fixation cross, and you move the dot, in and out of in and out of existence in your visual field, you can confirm for yourself that there's this area in the retina where you're getting no data, right? Where there's just an absence of visual experience. You can do meditation, this kind of meditation on the nature of the self, or in Buddhist terms, on anatta, selflessness, or shunyata, emptiness, depending on how you want to think about it. You can play at the boundary of that sense of self and no self in a refined enough way and in a meticulous enough way, so as to confirm for yourself that this feeling of subject, the feeling that you are divided from your experience in this subject-object way, is spurious, right? And that there really is, as a matter of experience, only experience, right? And you're not on the edge of it, you're not in the middle of it, you're identical to it, right? There is this totality of energy, sight, sound, sensation, everything in your sensorium, including your mind and its objects. And there's no boundary between you and any of it. There is no you to be aiming the spotlight of attention into it or onto it, right? And there are many things that follow from that insight. The more you can explore it, the more you can sort of unpack its significance psychologically. But so there's a lot to be said about that. And as Chris pointed out, there are differences of opinion about the metaphysics of all of that, and and what any of that means, and what we should think on the basis of that experience. But this is if there is an experience that exists at the heart of the perennial philosophy that unites all of these mystical traditions to some degree, it's the intimation of this experience that, again, in certain contexts, it immediately gets layered with what I consider to be bogus, religious concepts and metaphysics. But there is this ground truth. I mean, it really is the ground of being, by another name, that can be discovered. And that's, again, it's an objective claim, but it's a very simple claim, and it takes, in my case, I probably spent a year on silent retreat and still couldn't reliably notice this about my mind, right? So it's like I was, and by silent retreat, I mean really doing nothing but meditate for 12 to 18 hours a day. I did that, the longest I ever did was 3 months, but I did that twice, and I did 2 months many times, and 1 month, and I'd probably done at least a year before I got enough, I got kind of crucial instruction for me that allowed me to notice this just very directly without any real effort, and that was as Chris said, that was in a Dzogchen context. So there's a role for precise information here. I think it matters that if you have a confusing map, it's not going to be surprising that you're confused about the territory, and I view some maps as intrinsically confusing. But anyway, it's an experiment you can run on yourself, and yes, it can be frustrating. It can sound grandiose. It can sound certainly adjacent to mystical and religious claims that do not have good scientific bona fides. But there's nothing unscientific about this. It really is. You can tackle this very much in the spirit of scientific hypothesis and ultimately confirm it or not. I mean, it's granted, it is somewhat. It's confusing what to make of one's failure to confirm it, right? Like if you went on a 10-day retreat and you didn't experience anything like this, and you came away thinking, well, there's no there. I would have nothing to say but try harder, right? But The problem is this insight can't be physically demonstrated in a way that some things can. Like if I was telling you, well, it's possible to hit a golf ball 300 yards, right? And here's how to do it. And then you have someone like Tiger Woods who can do it, just go up and do it, right? Then it doesn't matter how much you struggle and fail to do it. You still know it can be done, right? You know, like you just saw someone else do it. And there's some
Sam, I think
certain
we might
things
have
that
to.
Can't be demonstrated in that way.
Yeah, I take that point. I'm sorry to jump in and cut you off, but I think we're not going to get to the bottom of metaphysics in 25 minutes, but we've definitely given it a good go.
Okay.
Just because you have to go shortly, I thought we might move on to some other topics.
Sam, maybe this I can tie two together that are,
Sure.
I think, related. And I can't remember if it came up in the past content, but I know you've thought about it quite a bit. So you've done a number of episodes on the Palestine and Israel conflict, understandably, and took quite a strong line in presenting it as kind of the forces of civilization fighting, you know, the kind of jihadism, extremism. And there's a couple of points I'd like to raise there, but one is that you very strongly emphasize the role of jihadism as like a core component that goes kind of under acknowledged, and that is part of what is very much driving the conflict and which makes it into an asymmetric warfare, because one side is not playing by the same rules, right? Because they are pining for an everlasting second life, right? So stop me if there's anything that I've said wrong there in terms of framing jihadism as the central component of that conflict, motivating it.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I'm sure I know where you're going here. Let me just perhaps save you some time. I fully acknowledge that in many of these conflicts, and certainly in the conflict with the Palestinians, between Israel and the Palestinians, there are other layers to the problem, and there's a layer of nationalism. Hamas is. If you were going to ask, what is the difference between a group like Hamas and a group like the Islamic State? The variable of nationalism is certainly a lot of the difference, right? And for that reason, the Islamic State, a jihadist organization like the Islamic State, would view Hamas as a kind of an apostate organization, right? And the fact that they have the goal of a nation state is anathema, right? So it's not just jihadism. But the thing that worries me most about this conflict and about many of these other conflicts is the fanatical religious layer of it. That's the thing that makes it truly insoluble from my point of view. If it was just ordinary nationalism, even if you add a layer of terrorism onto nationalism, as you did in the so-called Troubles in Ireland, right? It's like the Troubles would have been much more troublesome. Granted they were awful, but they would have been much worse if you added a layer of fanatical commitment to martyrdom and jihad, right? Like that makes things worse, and that's always the point I want to bang on about. That if you're not going to acknowledge that piece of it, like the cancer on top of the bacterial infection. We're not talking about what's real.
I think completely that, like any account which doesn't acknowledge the role of jihadism and extremist ideologies would be absolutely, incomplete. Like you can't deal with Islamic extremism without talking about the underlying ideology. But one of the issues that I have with the way that you've presented it is that whenever you are talking about the need to take into account what the extremists say, right, and to look at what they are telling us, right, the issue of Tabik, for why we hate you, you've commented on it, and that kind of thing. There are various statements from Hamas and other groups active in that area which come across as, motivated by jihadist ideology, and they want to wipe Israel out, and it's a holy war. But at the same time, there are also statements which very clearly link it to political grievances, especially national grievances, and in the oft-referenced Hamas charter, right, that they started with, they did produce a more moderate one. Now, I'm not saying you've got to hand it to Hamas for doing that or take them at their word, but I'm saying that the fact that they would remove the section, right, that specifically is openly anti-Semitic, openly stating that they're going to wipe Israel out, doesn't that contradict the image that you're suggesting that, you know, if these are people that are purely motivated by going to heaven, why don't you see so many more martyrs? Why would you find things like them trying to moderate language in a new charter? Why not double down? Doesn't that like somewhat contradict the notion that it's purely about the religious ideology from their own mouths?
It's not purely. Again, it's not purely. I think it's purely. The problem is more.
I just got my first, okay, in T3 maps, Greater Jeweler's Orb. Holy shnikes. That is long overdue. I have gotten 2 divines. Bear in mind, I'm in SSF right now, so divines are not very good. Although I did actually manage to use a divine to, I think, get a pretty good roll on an item. But still, that's my first Greater Jeweler's Orb. I'm so excited to put that onto Lunar Assault and start fucking Lunar Assaulting people. Oh my god. Yes, finally. Jesus. About time. I knew it was bound to happen eventually. You start stacking those up eventually, but right now, whew, that was rough.
More or less purely religion, right? I mean, if everyone were Sunni Muslim in the region, we'd have no problem, right? So religious tribalism is the major variable here, but jihadism itself is an additional problem, and yeah, I mean, I can be forgiven for not trusting Hamas. I think that their original charter is far closer to what they really believe and really want than their subsequent refinement of it, which is still, not good. It's only just good by comparison. I just think they're politically, perhaps a little savvier than they used to be. They realize they have to export this, their product to the rest of the world and use the rest of the world as leverage, but against Israel. But I mean, just look at how carefree they are with respect to their atrocities. I mean, they're not really trying to seem like rational actors to the rest of the world. I mean, you don't burn families alive and shoot it on your GoPros and then drag dismembered bodies through the streets and bloodied hostages and kidnap babies and I mean, it's just the idea that they're moderated in a way that I should care about is fairly absurd.
It's not,
still,
I'm not.
charter.
Yeah, I'm not saying you should care for that. It's more that, as you mentioned, the terror that they unleashed on October 7th is very well documented. Yet you have lots of their supporters and maybe actually a majority doubting many of the things that happened, right? You have the Hamas stating that they didn't target civilians, right? In various statements, like Hamas officials make different kinds of statements. But the point is that if you're right, and it is just about a holy war and paradise, why even pretend in that case? Because if it's good to kill Jews as many as you can, why cast doubts that there's a conspiracy? Why not say that you are just about targeting the infidels?
Well, in most cases they're not. I mean, most cases, the leaders of Hamas in the immediate aftermath, I don't know what they've said since, but they said they would do this as many times as they could, right? They were not
until
they're splitting it differently than I think you're suggesting. They're just saying that there are no non-combatants in Israel. They're all combatants because they're occupying land that's not theirs, right? They're all settlers. They're all colonists. I mean, it's all illegitimate, right? From the river to the sea. So it's not. So like if they're killing teenagers at a rave, they're not disposed to distinguish between them and soldiers carrying guns, right? It's just they're all combatants.
I'm certainly not claiming like Hamas is an ethical organization that is making those. I'm saying that various members of their leadership and supporters make appeal to that, which suggests that they aren't occupying the kind of justification space that you're suggesting the majority of them
listen,
are.
I would agree, and I've said this before. I think it's a distinction that doesn't make much of a difference in the present case, but Hamas, certainly historically, I mean, prior to October 7th, if you had asked me to compare Hamas and the Islamic State, I would have said the Islamic State was much scarier than Hamas, much more of a real jihadist organization than Hamas is. And I would still say that to some considerable degree. And yet Hamas, even with all of its sort of quasi-terrestrial goals, was still capable of medieval barbarism, which they seem committed to replicating whenever they're given the chance. Yes, the Islamic State is the much purer case of where jihadism leads, and it's what it looks like in the pure, in a petri dish, right? I mean that's the unadulterated strain. The Islamic State. So
I guess the flip side, and it relates to that, is that whenever discussing like Israel, that yourself and I would say Douglas Murray as well, who you've had on the channel, are rightly kind of pushing back at the equivalents that we see on the far left, right, or the kind of anti-Semitism that is clearly there in the reaction to the October 7th attack. But in so doing, there's often a loss of nuance that on the Israel side, you have also religious extremists, and not just fringe extremists with no influence, right? You have a member of the government, Ben Gvir, who had the poster of the Goldstein massacre guy, right? The person who went in and gunned down. That's somebody in the Israeli government who had a poster on the wall of a terrorist and one Netanyahu kind of supporting the increasing settlement movement and courting the far right, the religious right. So my kind of point there is, if you present that conflict as being, purely about the forces of civilization versus like a religious fanatical cult, and don't mention that there is a fanatical religious cult that is in the government of Israel and has made various statements which are similarly talking about the promised land and reclaiming it, that it seems like you're being selective. And it doesn't mean that you have to say they're both equal in that respect. You can still completely condemn Hamas and all the things. You can still argue that Israel has a right to defend itself, but it doesn't require serving as their kind of propaganda wing, because lots of Israelis were very unhappy with Netanyahu and his government. It is a very right-wing government. And the last thing I'll say, and I'll give you a chance to respond, Sam, is like the ex-Israeli prime minister who was assassinated, Rabin, he wasn't assassinated by Islamic extremists. Yeah. He was assassinated by a Jewish extremist who derailed the peace negotiations that were going on, and the legacy of which was that Netanyahu, who was in opposition to Rabin, ended up in power. So the history over there is very complex in that, but I'm arguing, isn't there a case that the presentation yourself and Douglas Murray have done kind of whitewashes those concerns, which are legitimate?
No. I mean, I raised those points a fair amount. It's just in proportion to the problem on the Islamic side, they're quite small. I mean, they're very unhelpful. I would fully grant to you that Netanyahu has been a disaster. His support for the settlements has been provocative. He's to some degree culpable for what happened on October 7th, if for no other reason that his attention was split, and he was propping up the settlements in the West Bank and leaving the border with Gaza, fairly undefended, right? So, but yeah, all the mad work that the settlers are doing in the West Bank, and the religious extremists who support them, all of that is incredibly unhelpful, and I don't support it at all. I mean, I've said in other contexts, I thought that the settlers should be dragged off contested land by their beards, right? I mean, that's not optically a great thing to say in the aftermath of October 7th, but I'm Jewish and I can say whatever I want on the topic. I think those people are religious imbeciles, and they're creating immense harm, right? And they're imagined claims upon real estate based on where they think Abraham walked shouldn't be supported, because I think it's very unlikely Abraham even existed at this point. So religious maniacs in every context are people I would these are views and behaviors I would condemn. But again, we have to be alert to the differences both with respect to the sheer numbers of people and their influence, but also with respect to the specific beliefs that they're maniacally adhering to, and the logical and behavioral consequences of those beliefs. I mean, the differences really do matter. And it matters that Judaism does not have a clear conception of the afterlife, and much less one that could really motivate a carefree attitude toward martyrdom, right, and the martyrdom of one's children. So I'm not saying that there aren't Jews who aren't willing to die for their beliefs. I mean, there are people who are willing to die for their beliefs. They're all flavors of those sorts of people. But there's something about the doctrines of martyrdom and jihad that are especially unhelpful, right? And when you look at just the sheer numbers, there are 15 million Jews on earth, and most Jews don't believe anything that I care about. There's very little commitment to otherworldly propositions and the supernatural among Jews generally. They're just an overwhelmingly secular and even agnostic group of people. And then you have the ultra-Orthodox who, believe whole rafts of divisive nonsense that I don't support. And I think they should be politically disenfranchised insofar as that's possible in Israel. When you can find one of them who's saying idiotic things about some kind of counter genocide, or talking about the Amalekites in the Bible that needed to get wiped out down to the last child. Let's kill their livestock as well, right? It's sheer religious barbarism, Taliban style that I would never support. But again, there's so few of these people. Yes, a few of them are in the wrong places. A few of them are in too close to power in Netanyahu's government. But there really isn't much of an analogy to draw between the two sides. If the Jews in Israel were behaving like the Palestinians, if they were committing analogous atrocities, going into music festivals in the West Bank and raping and burning teenagers, and then supporting it to the tune of 80%. Once you export these details to the rest of Israeli society, you had Jews dancing in the streets over these moral victories. And when you poll them, 80% claim to support the atrocity just committed, right? Or they're just riddled with conspiracy theories about how it never happened, right? And there's just no way to have a reality-based discussion with these people because they're so addled by their religious mania, right? If that were true of the Jews of Israel, I would condemn them in precisely the same terms that I condemn jihadism and its influence in the Palestinian community.
There was a poll done recently, Sam, and it was discussed by Rory Stewart, who you recently had on the podcast, where they polled Israeli public about how concerned they should be about the suffering of civilians in Gaza. And it was a similar percentage, something like 80% that said it shouldn't be a concern, right? The priority should be the wiping out of Hamas. And I think for a lot of people, they do see an equivalence. They don't see the equivalence in terms of like that the Israeli IDF is just going in and mowing down civilians at a rave. But they do look at the fact that there's huge amounts of people starving with no access to water now in Gaza, right? And that there is a huge death toll. No matter whether you think the war is justified or not, it is absolutely the case that there's huge amounts of unjustified suffering there. And so you pointed, the kind of Islamist and jihadism, but I would say that is creating really fertile ground for, in general, just a psychology of justified grievance. And, if you have a proud people, that is going to be remembered. It will lead to support for more extreme groups. If you remove Hamas, I would hope there's a chance for like more moderate things, but it doesn't seem that the most punitive response possible, targeting civilian populations. And I'm not saying like targeting civilian populations on purpose, right? I am talking about it being a collateral of attempting to remove Hamas from civilian populations. But in that respect, whenever you have organizations like the Tamil Tigers, right? That was a Marxist organization with Hindu members that was pioneering suicide attacks. There you don't have a very strong reference.
They learned it from Hezbollah, but yes, they were pioneering it after they learned it from Hezbollah.
But in that respect of being able to motivate people for it, Rory Stewart raised the point as well, that if people are very strongly wedded to a particular ideology, be it Marxism, be it whatever the case might be, you don't always need a paradise in order to motivate people. And so I'm kind of layering in 2 points. One is that what is happening in Gaza now is undoubtedly a humanitarian crisis with huge suffering, and that will motivate. It seems certainly possible to motivate more extremism in response. And related to that, that it isn't just the jihadist and afterlife narratives that enable people to end up like being willing to sacrifice themselves for causes. You see it all the time in nationalist causes in World War II for different reasons with, Japan and so on. So those 2 points, that there is a level of huge suffering going on at the minute, and it's in Gaza, right, primarily, not in Israel.
Yeah, well, I think there's probably 3 points in there I should respond to. One is just this comparison between the moral status of the people suffering in Gaza, the innocent victims of bombing, so-called collateral damage, which was the euphemism we tend to use here, and let's take the teenagers massacred at the music festival by Hamas, right? There's a very important difference between those two groups of people. The first are being victimized. However surely they're being victimized, it is inadvertent. It is not desired on the Israeli side. Leave aside the sociopathic fanatic who wants to kill Palestinian children. Generally speaking, if the IDF could go in there and kill only Hamas, if you gave them magical weapons, what would they do with them? They would kill only Hamas, right? And they would turn Gaza into, the south of France, right? I mean, it's clarifying to ask, what would people do if you gave them the power to do anything they want? What would they do? What would members of Hamas do? They would kill all the Jews on earth, no question, right? And many other people, right? And what would the Islamic State do? They would turn the whole world into the hellhole that they created in Syria and Iraq, right? That's exactly the way they like it. Crucifying apostates and blasphemers, taking sex slaves, all of it, right? None of that was an aberration. That's exactly what they wanted, right? What would Dick Cheney have done, in the invasion of Iraq? Would he have killed everybody? No, he would have turned Iraq into Oklahoma, right? So it's important to track people's actual motives. What kind of world do they want to build? Like, what do they want for other people? Just how zero sum are they, right?
Wait, Sam, I
gotta
jump in there because I'm not sure if that analogy is helpful.
Let me just give you one aspect before you jump in. Let me just give you the one real world variant of it, which you really can't argue with. What did we do to Germany and Japan? We, the Allies, do to Germany and Japan after World War II? What revealed our motives with respect to the German people and the Japanese people? I mean, we killed a whole lot of innocent people, right? I mean, the firebombing of Dresden, Tokyo. I mean, it's just to say nothing of the nuclear bombs we dropped. I mean, indiscriminate violence of a sort that Israel is simply not practicing now at all, right? It doesn't matter how many kids die in Gaza. Israel is not doing what we did in World War II at all.
Yeah, no, I take those points.
But our revealed preference, our preference was revealed with respect to what we did after we won. Did we just take them all the pretty girls as sex slaves? Is that what we did in Germany and Japan? Did we kill all the fighting age males? No, we helped build those two societies, right?
Yeah,
we wanted sane collaborators in Germany and Japan, and we got them. Amazing, right?
No, you've made that point well. One of your points was about the stated intentions, right, and
right.
versus unpleasant side effects.
Okay, that's why you can't use body count to resolve this issue. You're right. It's like it doesn't matter that the Israelis have killed more Palestinians than Hamas killed in Israel, right? That's not the way to think about it.
It's just collateral damage and like sort of unpleasant necessities is not always such a clear thing. Like the limit to that thought experiment, I think, is illustrated by, say, communism in Southeast Asia. Take the Khmer Rouge, Pol Pot. You know, like their stated goal is to build a utopian communist society. If they had the power to do anything they want, they wouldn't just massacre a bunch of people. They would turn them into very good politically aligned communists. But unfortunately, they had to kill an awful lot of people because out of necessity.
Right. Okay. But there are Orwellian projects. There are situations where words don't mean what they seem to mean. You can't just track these superficial sentences so as to get to the moral core of what someone is attempting to do. What are people's real intentions with respect to other people? I mean, whatever Kim Jong-un says about North Korea, we know what his intentions are, right? He's turned that into a prison state because he's a total sociopath, right? It's not like he wants everyone to be happy and well-fed and prosperous. He wants to rule like a sadist over a prison population. And that's what he's doing.
Would that mean that we don't take into account that there are various statements made by senior figures in Israel which suggest that, like, for example, whether or not they want to do it, if the Gaza population relocated to Egypt, that wouldn't be a terrible thing, right? And
yeah.
So if Ben Gvir or so on have made various extreme statements, which in the same respect
honestly, that's not all that extreme. I mean, honestly, I don't know how. I mean, he's just running. I'm not supporting him, but you know, it's hard to see how Israel survives in the long term. It's hard to see how Israel is a viable project with the current assumptions of a so-called two-state solution. I don't know how it works. I mean, either they're not really states, or something has radically changed about the cultures. But there's no one-state solution, given what most Islamists and jihadists and conservatives among the Palestinians actually want, right? I mean, that's a recipe for at the minimum just a demographic change that is not compatible with the endurance of a Jewish state.
A demographic change where the entire Arab population of Gaza is relocated to a different country, and that the country is then subsumed into part of Israel. That would be like genocide, right? At least cultural.
No, that's not genocide. No. Genocide has a specific meaning.
Okay, at very least, then it is a forced relocation.
You mean ethnic cleansing? You mean ethnic cleansing, right? Which is a word, which is a phrase that's often used along with genocide, and they are worlds apart with respect to their moral implications. I mean, history is just full of ethnic cleansing, which means people moving, right? People who can't get along wind up moving apart, right? That happens a hell of a lot, and it's it can be awful in terms of when done at the point of a sword, which happened under Islam again and again and again. I mean, nobody's losing sleep over the Jews that got run out of Syria and Yemen and Iraq and Egypt and Morocco, and all after 1948, right? Like no one's talking about their right of return. You know, what happened to their homes? The UN's not worrying about that, right? And yet everyone is worried about the Palestinians as this perpetual refugee population. What about all the people who left Syria in 2015 and went to Sweden, right? Okay, they've been.
But that,
do they have perpetual refugee status, or are they just now in Sweden?
so Sam, just to clarify, so you are saying that like ethnic cleansing of the Gaza Strip isn't extreme position? 2 million people.
It's totally extreme. It is totally extreme in that it's a non-starter. I mean, no one in the Palestinian world wants that, right? And the Arab and if you look at the Arab states' contribution to the status quo over the last 50 years, it has been very deliberately to hold the Palestinians in perpetual refugee status, so as to put the existence of Israel in question perpetually. And when you look at how the Jordanians and the Egyptians treat the Palestinians, they're just as culpable for. I mean, take Egypt, which governs one of the borders of Gaza, right? It is just as culpable for keeping Gaza a quote open air prison as Israel is, right? Because they're maintaining one of their borders, and they don't want the Palestinians in their society either. But it's a.
We do recognize the desire for self-determination, and I'm not talking about from the river to the sea, like recapturing the land. I mean, purely a people regarding their homeland as being occupied or taken, or that they've been moved. That is hugely fertile ground for breeding conflict and extremism and that kind of thing. I just maybe I'm a little bit more sensitive to this as somebody from Northern Ireland, right? And there, I know the situation is not as comparable in terms of the level of suffering involved in that kind of thing, but there you have, for example, a Republican party, Sinn Féin, that doesn't recognize the legitimacy of British control of the Northern Irish state, right? But still gets elected into power. They were associated with a terrorist group, the IRA. They're now, I think, the biggest party in the Republic of Ireland as well. And their overall long-term plan is to see Ireland reunited, right, into a unified thing. But they are a political party that people have to deal with, and they have renounced violence, and it's a different situation. I'm not drawing the parallel in terms of saying, well, Hamas is just the IRA in waiting. No. I'm saying though that those kind of very strong feelings about the right to self-determination, if you relocated the population out of Gaza, that would be the second Nakba, wouldn't it? And the first Nakba led to a conflict that's lasted for longer than any of us have been alive.
Well, the analogy to Ireland, to make it a real analogy, I mean, there are reasons why it doesn't work great, but you'd also have to imagine, a dozen other Irish-speaking states with Irish culture surrounding this whole problem that the Northern Irish would be displaced too if they had their Nakba of ethnic cleansing, right? It's a different situation where you have to. I mean, wonder why
it's completely different. It's a completely different situation because I've had people say, well, you wouldn't just allow the British to bomb Belfast, right, to get rid of the IRA during the Troubles. And that's true. But if the IRA had launched a raid on a city in the UK and killed a bunch of people and stolen babies, I think you actually would have seen, significant military action in wherever they took the children away to. So there are not parallels one-to-one. But in the notion of the British arranged plantations, moved populations over, and the Northern Ireland ended up with a demographically
I'm not disagreeing with you. I completely understand the nationalistic and aspirations of the Palestinians, and there is an analogy to any other group of people that want their own nation. But the moral core of this problem and the asymmetry of it should be unignorable, and it's this. This is a statement that you've probably heard me make, and you've probably heard Douglas Murray make it, but it's nonetheless true, which is if the Palestinians put down their weapons, if they were peaceful, right? If they and even if they were peaceful protesters of a Gandhian sort, right? They would this problem would be solved, and the two societies could live happily together. There would be a two-state solution. There would have been a two-state solution decades ago. If the Jews of Israel,
just to point there,
well, let me just land the obverse statement. The obverse statement is if the Jews of Israel put down their weapons, there would be a genocide, right? That is, October 7th reveals that to be as objectively true as a statement as we can make in this sort of area.
So the only point I was going to raise there is, like, you've had Netanyahu come out and say there won't be a two-state solution. We can't.
But that's because of who the Palestinians are, and because of how Islam is informing their worldview, right? If Islam were a peaceful religion, if Islam was Jainism, and there was no notion of jihad, we would have a completely different situation, right? If they had a leader, if they were producing leaders like Gandhi, right, or Martin Luther King Jr., right, it would be a completely different situation. That's not what. So Netanyahu, and again, Netanyahu is awful and again culpable for the disaster he's presiding over, right? So Israel needs better leaders, right? But he is reacting to the ongoing reality of what the Palestinians and even the surrounding Muslim states have wanted since Israel was born 70 some odd years ago, right? And it's that, and so much of the conversation, it has been explicitly genocidal as to make anything other than a very strong defensive posture unthinkable for the Israelis.
Wouldn't that imply that when there was a much greater chance of a two-state solution, when the negotiations were going on, and they, in part, there were people on the Palestinian side who tried to scupper that, right? Who were doing suicide attacks and atrocities. But you also did have atrocities committed by extremists on the right, who are now people involved with those movements are in the government. So it isn't fair to say that there's just a
tiny number. I mean, it's ridiculous when you focus on it. It's like Biden just passed an executive order that focused on 4 Israelis in the West Bank. Like, literally, the president of the United States created an executive order that dealt with the destructive behavior of 4 people on the Israeli side, right? I mean, it's like in order to give somewhat semblance of balance to the situation, it's just not an analogous problem. I'll stipulate everything of that sort. The massacre at a mosque that kills 25 people once in a generation, right, is awful and decidedly unhelpful. Right. And yes, a religious extremist is on the Jewish side is who assassinated Rabin. Right. And it was a religious extremist on the Hindu side who killed Gandhi. Right. There are those people, but there's just not the analogous problem, there or anywhere else. I mean, we have not had to deal with crazy security concerns getting on airplanes for the last 25 years because so many Jews want to blow themselves up on airplanes. It just has not been the problem. And if it were, that's the problem I would be focusing on.
Well, I think we might disagree on the degree to which the far right in Israel has a significant presence in the government. But there's one more.
I'm not disagreeing. I'm saying that's terrible and should change. And I think it will change. I mean, the reason why it hasn't changed yet is because, again, they're in the middle of this emergency and this war, and Netanyahu, is a very Trumpian figure, is using this emergency to prolong his life as a political figure. But I think at the first opportunity, Netanyahu will be out of office, right? I just think that is the general sentiment among Israelis. I mean, he's most Israelis. I don't know what the recent polls say, but I have to think something close to 80% of Israelis are furious with Netanyahu.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I've actually heard really good stuff from moderate progressive Israelis, and also really good stuff from moderate people in Gaza, Palestinians, and they don't sound that different, to be honest. And I think most reasonable people have a lot of sympathy with, obviously, the victims of terrorist attacks, and also the civilians who are killed by indiscriminate bombing. I guess. Look, I'm just going to make one.
But
little
it is different. It just, again, we can't lose sight of. I mean, body count just does not get at the moral difference between the two sides.
Yeah,
but it's a point that, like, again, people forget it. Whenever it's just it can't be. It can't maintain its salience in the face of images of dead children being pulled out of rubble in Gaza, right? It's just like you have to sort of rerun the argument again, so as to gain some perspective on what's happening.
I think we all get that motivations matter, right? There is a difference between a child who is killed by a bomb that wasn't targeted at them and a child who was executed by a terrorist. I mean,
to give a very anodyne example,
have children.
To give a very anodyne example, but this makes the point from the other side, right? Like the three of us live in societies where there's some ambient level of carnage due to car accidents every year, and it's totally predictable. I mean, in the United States, there will be something like 40,000 people killed this year on our highways, right? And it's just because people are bad drivers, and eventually self-driving cars will solve this problem, but not yet, right? Mm-hmm. Now, we know with it to a moral certainty that we could reduce all this death and suffering if we just lowered the speed limit, right? Just made it like wherever you can drive 60 miles an hour, let's cap that at 30 miles an hour. We would save thousands of lives, probably tens of thousands of lives in America, right? We don't do it. Are we just sociopathic murderers for not doing that? Is that like every day of our lives? Are we like Saddam Hussein level evil bastards for not doing that? No, we're not even thinking about it, right? It's like it's just not even. And when you bring it up, it's just kind of a curiosity. It's like, well, yeah, but that would just be so boring to drive a maximum of 30 miles an hour. It would take forever. There'd be it'd be economic costs.
No, we totally get it. The point is well made. And likewise, if there was an equivalent number of car deaths, but they were being caused by murderers, right, then there would be an outcry and extreme measures would be taken to stop it. No,
yes. So all those details really do matter.
Yeah. The only point that I'll inject into this, and I don't think it's too controversial, is just that perhaps the reason why I don't attribute all of the responsibility for the terrorist attacks to religion specifically, right, and the pernicious ideas that are in religion, and all three of us are atheists, right? None of us like religion. Is just that I recognize that one, the social and political context matters, and there's a big driver for why people do the things they do, why they're attracted to an ideology, right? There's a reason why, even though you have fundamentalist Christians in the United States, they're not blowing stuff up because they're relatively comfortable. No one's taken away their farms and things like that. And the second thing is just that I have to acknowledge that there is an asymmetry, right? In Northern Ireland, the Irish were blowing up bombs, right? And they were doing that, I don't think, because they were contaminated by worse ideas than the British. There was a power asymmetry there, right? They didn't have the option to send in regiments of armored cars and things like that. Like, that was the only tactic they had. And I think we just have to acknowledge that there are asymmetries there of different kinds. You pointed to one legitimate one, which is one of motivations and stated intentions and so on. But there's also asymmetries in terms of the relative power differential, and that defines what tactics are even available to you. One side has planes and can drop guided bombs. The other side doesn't. They send in guys on bloody motorbikes and paragliders or whatever. So that's just my point there.
Sam, I might have a last topic before we let you escape.
If you have time. Do you have time
for one last thing?
Yeah, I mean, I'm actually past my cutoff. But what's the topic? Let's see how quickly can we touch it.
Okay, let's see if we can clear it.
Let me know what it is, and then I'll see if it's possible.
I wanted to talk about pornography of doubt and conspiracism, taking account of it on the left and right, and in particular the kind of growth of people who are very selective in their criticism of it, right? That they are documentarians of the opposing side, but not on their own side, and some questions about that.
Okay, yeah. I mean, let's do it briefly because I do have to jump. But yeah, I mean, I think I know where you're going, but feel free to sharpen it up with a specific example.
Okay, so like I said, you've raised the point quite articulately about the pornography of doubt and of various people, that institutions aren't perfect, and that there are plenty of things that you can criticize in institutions. There are ideological things in various institutions that should be criticized and are criticized, but that we need institutions and that we should try to be fair in calling out whenever people are engaging in selective condemnation. And in that respect, I'm wondering about currently, for example, just to give one illustrative example for you to deal with. Douglas Murray has been very strong condemning all of the equivalents around the October 7th and the rise of anti-Semitism. Very, very vocal opponent of that, arguing with various people, in a passionate way. On the other hand, he was a defender, him and various other people in that sphere, Jordan Peterson, so on, of Orban's government, which made use of anti-Semitic tropes, right, and rolled back various democratic things, the independence of the judiciary, and so on. And Anne Applebaum has kind of made this point, talking about intellectual clerics who defend authoritarianism, right? And I'm not talking about people who are MAGA, Trump, right-wing maniacs, right? I'm more talking about that kind of selective application, and that if you were concerned, for example, about anti-Semitism and rising authoritarianism and ideologies that are anti-liberal, you should be very concerned about things like what is happening in Hungary or Turkey, just as much as you are with things going on in the broader Muslim world.
Yes. Yeah, I agree, except emergencies make strange bedfellows, right? And Douglas has been focused much more on the erosion of basic sanity in Europe than I have been, right? So I have much more of an American perspective on a lot of these questions. So the refugee crisis in 2015 that hit Europe to an extraordinary degree, hit America much less so, and Douglas was all over that, and I think that's probably when he had some entanglement with Orban, but I really don't know the details there. I know Douglas to be an incredibly sane and courageous voice on the specific issues we've been talking about. I mean, specifically, Islamism, jihadism, the identitarian politics of the left that has blinded so many people to the threat of jihadism and Islamism in the West. I mean, the fact that you have 300,000 people coming out essentially in support of Hamas after October 7th in the streets of London, I think that's unsustainable. I mean, I share Douglas's alarm about that. I mean, Douglas, you have people, you have MPs, stepping down from Parliament, who, because they perceive their security concerns to be too difficult around these issues in the UK. The truth is, I don't even think Douglas can spend much time in the UK and be safe at this point. And it's not because he's a bigot who's antagonized otherwise rational people. No, there's a stealth Islamist jihadist takeover of the public space in the UK, at these moments, and the authorities, the institutions, don't quite know what to do about it. right? I mean, they're completely ineffectual with respect to policing this problem and getting rid of imams who are actually preaching for the destruction of the UK, right? I mean, the barbarians have been let inside the gates. There's no question of that, and it's a much bigger problem in the UK than it is in the United States. And at this point, it's important that the people in the U.S. figure out how not to make the mistakes that many Western European countries have made with respect to the spread of Islamism, right? I'm not talking about all Muslims, right? I'm talking about Islamists and jihadists. In fact, the first people I would want to see immigrate to my society are actual secular Muslims, or better yet, ex-Muslims, right? I mean, those are the ex-Muslims are the most valuable people on earth, as far as I'm concerned, with respect to this issue, right? Give me 100 million people like Ayaan Hirsi Ali or Yasmin Mohammed or Sarah Hayter, or like these people are exactly the people you want in your society, right? And then after them, you want actual liberal Muslims, right? So this is not a Muslim ban on immigration, but this idiotic idea that you can absorb an endless number of people who have zero interest in assimilating, and what's more, they're importing a triumphal vision of Islamic supremacy into your society, and anti-Semitism, and misogyny, right? And Douglas is living on the front line of that clash of civilizations in an extraordinarily brave way, right? And his security his security concerns are not security concerns you would want, and they're coming from only one group of people, right? Predictably. Right.
Yeah, I can imagine that. So maybe I can tune it up the point, Sam, a bit, which is that, granted, various concerning tendencies on the social justice left, and there are different opinions about the degree to which that has captured all scientific institutions, all education, all media. But given the people that we cover in this podcast, right, the most kind of unhinged guru types who are constantly setting themselves up as the solution to this problem, right? They're saying, don't trust academics. They lied about COVID. They lie about, men and women, all that. It's all bullshit. Don't trust the government, the CDC, everything. It's all corrupt. And then, as an alternative, present themselves, their podcast, which you've talked about, the problems with Podcastistan. But in that, there's a kind of, what you talked about, a pornography of doubt, where you have people that are then posing populist right-wing alternatives. Douglas Murray was at the National Conservatism Conference in the UK and the ART Conference. Those are not the moderate right-wing groups like Rory Stewart. Orban is not moderate right. That's populist right-wing, quite extreme right. And
Douglas and I let me just short circuit this because I am truly out of time, but I've never spoken with Douglas about any of that. I mean, I have not spoken with Douglas all that much. I would certainly be eager to talk to him about all of that and see what he was thinking and what he thinks going forward. I can just there might be some genuine daylight between us on those issues, but I can see in extremis, I can see the impulse to, you sort of have to pick the allies you can find, right? And in certain contexts, there are inconvenient alliances, right? I mean, and I could imagine if things were quite a bit worse in the U.S. with respect to the derangement of the left and the threat the real threat of Islamism subverting much of what I care about in American society, which is where we are in the UK. Honestly, when I saw those protests after October 7th, I thought, okay, London is ruined, right? It's just that's just an awful situation. That this is the number of people you can get out in support of atrocity, right? If that were the situation in the U.S., I might find myself on stage with, quasi-theocratic Christians, right? who are like the last people I could find to see eye to eye with me on this particular subject, right? Honestly, the only reliable people in the United States for the longest time on this subject, and it may, to some degree, to a first approximation, it's still true, are fundamentalist Christians. They're the only people who you don't have to burn endless amounts of gas trying to convince that jihadists actually believe in paradise, right? I mean, when I'm at an academic conference talking to anthropologists, I can't get anyone to agree that anyone believes in paradise, right? It's just they think it's all economics, it's all politics, it's all propaganda, it's all posturing. You have to find a Christian. You have to find a Christian fundamentalist in the crowd who at least knows what it's like to believe in heaven, right?
Sam, I know you gotta disappear, but I have to push back at that because I'm involved in the area about extremism research, and I've met I know you say that often, but
do you know Scott Tran?
I do know Scotty Tran,
you know Richard Schwader?
Yes.
Both of them, face to face, have denied that anyone believes in paradise to me.
Right. Yes, but there's a much bigger.
On Scott Tran's count, it's all just bonding among fictive kin. Male bonding among fictive kin. It's all just like soccer players bonding. It's got nothing to do with paradise. It's got nothing to do with expectation of martyrdom.
And commitment to sacred values is his model. So if your sacred value is that there's a particular religious one, he would also put that in thing. But in general, I would just say
delusion. This is pure delusion.
But Aryeh Kruglansky, for example, or various others, there's a lot of models, and a lot of them have prominent positions for ideology and take seriously. The probably quest for significance is one of the most well known, and that can slot in very easily religious quest for significance. So I want to push back on that because I would encourage you to go to those conferences and see.
I've been. I mean, unfortunately, it sounds like I just had the misfortune of arguing with the dumb anthropologists. But honestly, this is what I've encountered.
And the very, very last thing, Sam, is just that, so I know your point about you might end up with particular allies, given your stance on a given topic. And in some cases, compromises are necessary or people are making more sense. But I can't help but think that, I agree with Anne Applebaum's analysis that if you're someone that cares about liberal democracies and stuff, it is not right to side with the far right people who are rolling back democratic institutions. And there is a strong moderate left and right, the next leader in the UK is likely to be Keir Starmer. That's not Jeremy Corbyn. The leader in the Democrats is Joe Biden. Compared to Trump, compared to figures like Nigel Farage,
I completely agree with you.
I don't see them making more sense.
I will agree with Anne Applebaum all day long about anything that happens in Eastern Europe. Right? I mean, it's just she's a national treasure as far as I can tell. So that would be a great conversation. I mean, I will try to put Anne Applebaum on a podcast with Douglas Murray and see where we get to. Right? That could be fun.
On Hungary, that would be a pleasure. And so I know we're over the allotted time, and as predictable, we had some points of disagreement, but really appreciate you coming back, Sam, and the discussing.
Thanks for the opportunity to browbeat both of you and your audience.
Thank you, Sam. Good to be browbeat. Good to be browbeat.
Take care, you guys. Till next time.
Yeah, I agree. But so I think though that is why Matt took that term, and I think I gave you a clip which I think helps to illustrate this quite nicely. Jordan Hall, talking about how many paradigms he runs compared to a normal human.
Okay, let's play this clip.
Well, it's pre-trans. Why is this not a Quaker meeting? The Quakers are doing something awesome, but they're running one paradigm. What you have to actually say is, okay, let's at the very minimum, let's run both the Lakota and the Quaker paradigms. While we're at it, I'm usually running, 70 or 90 distinct paradigms simultaneously all the time. And there's many. And the idea is not to try to collapse them down to a single master paradigm, but actually to allow each one of them to have the particular piece that they're holding, just like eyes and ears. Say, okay, cool.
So not one or two. And just to note, Jordan Hall has subsequently took a Christian turn, as many have in the gurus of late. So he has actually collapsed things down to a dominant master paradigm. But at this stage, he was at least saying that's dangerous to do that. We don't want to do that.
We need to have 70 to 90 paradigms going at once. I mean, that reminds me of another thing, which is just the jargon. Like, what the hell does a paradigm mean here? Like, it's a meaningless term that sounds flashy. And it's like, of course, we're all complex individuals who might be thinking, well, what am I gonna eat for lunch next? And I'm having a conversation with Chris, and I gotta finish this paper later. And so I got 3 paradigms going on in my brain right now. But,
In his case, I believe the paradigms are referring, insofar as they do refer to anything concrete, is like worldview. So, if you're doing sociology, you might study health from the perspective of a Marxist or a functionalist or an interpretivist or, or different schools in archaeology or whatever the case might be. Mm-hmm. Now, you might, Flint, as a PhD, be able to, spin 5 or 6 at the same time to think about how they would look at different issues. But someone like Jordan Hall, they're doing 70 to 90 just while they're washing the dishes. That's it. That's it. So it's that presentation that you've got an all-encompassing knowledge across a diverse array of topics. You're not you might have a core specialty, but you can basically apply it, to every field: politics, history, science, genetics, maths, physics. It's all within your scope, philosophy, and rather crucially, because I think there is something for people being willing to, talk about topics that they're not necessarily expert in, just to give their opinion on. I don't think there's any issue with that. But the difference with what the gurus do is their confidence is never adjusted according to their level of knowledge or expertise. It's always extremely high. And even if they add in disclaimers, it's really like hollow disclaimers, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of there to give them an escape if they need, like the way Graham Hancock, floats so many ideas about lots of different areas: metallurgy and paleontology and archaeology and all these different fields.
From astronomy and the Younger Dryas to, the Sphinx and geology to et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. These astronomical alignments from megaliths, it's just sort of like, he'll go into any sort of topic as if he's an expert. Which, all right, to be fair, if we show kind of this chart that you made for Carl Sagan, it's pretty clear that this is a flaw that most science communicators have, because science communicators oftentimes communicate a wide variety of fields beyond just the one that they're trained in. And Carl Sagan, but not just him. I could think of most TV presenters, even that are scientists, that are trained as scientists. They're oftentimes presenting on fields that are outside of their own expertise. One of my favorites I just recorded with Alice Roberts. I absolutely love her. I think she does a great job, but she will talk on a wide variety of topics beyond what her training is in.
I think for me, the crucial issue is if you do that, do you at least caveat the level of confidence you have? And I know that in science communication, caveats or this kind of thing is deaf in a way, right? Because it can read like you don't have confidence in what you're saying. But I think it's a crucial distinction between public intellectuals and gurus, is that public intellectuals do, when they're discussing things, like Sean Carroll, for example, somebody that does Q&As and answers questions about a broad array of topics. But every time he does it, he speaks very clearly about what his point of view is, but he's always like, no, I don't know a lot about this topic, but from what I have read, this is the impression that I've got. And you're clear if he's speaking from a area that is rock solid, very confident about, versus is this a topic that I've just read a couple of things about, and this is my, initial thoughts on it, and that's the distinction that I think is like very important there.
Yeah, I think to some degree that in certain types of media, when you qualify your statement, it's going to get edited out, because that's just when you're producing something that I'm sure that happens all the time with David Attenborough or others like Alice Roberts or whatever, who do great jobs, but of course they come off confident with what they're saying, and those qualifications are oftentimes slimmed down. But of course, in a venue like social media or long form podcasting or YouTubing, you have the ability to make those qualifications, and that's a big important point. One example I can think of that was done really badly by Graham Hancock recently is he had this rebuttal video of me, and he's talking about metallurgy in ice cores, and he presents this evidence, and he's like, well, there's these trace elements in these ice cores. The scientists say that it's their opinion that that's not metallurgy, but I disagree with them. And it's like, what do you mean you disagree with them? You don't study this stuff at all. Why would you disagree with the experts who have spent their entire lives studying and publishing these things from no reason other than your opinion? And yeah.
Yeah, and there's we recently spoke with anthropologist, cognitive anthropologist Dorsa Amir, and she has this acronym that she called like STUPID, the danger of being stupid, which was studying topics uninformed by prior investigations in the discipline. I like that because she's interested in interdisciplinary work, but she was saying, a lot of people venture very confident opinions on things without doing the requisite like background, like even just cursory investigations of the literature, and that we should try and avoid that wherever that's possible. But so Graham Hancock could have a different opinion, right? If he'd spent time, and it might not be a good different opinion, but I don't even get the feeling that a lot of times that he's really read or paid much attention to the kind of thing.
Clearly not.
Yeah,
he just wants it to be another way because it matches his lost civilization ideas, fiction ideas. Okay, so that's the sense of galaxy brainness, which is where we're thinking about everything polymathism. And I will make the point that unlike Carl Sagan, I actually do try to stick to one of my goals as I do popular communication is to stick as closely to archaeology and my study of sort of pseudoscience as closely as possible, and not try to pretend I'm something I'm not. That said, I don't have problems with science communicators that go more broad. I think that there's room for good science communicators to do that. Okay, so let's move on to number two. Like I said, to me, this is the most dangerous, and I think you sort of mentioned that earlier, this anti-establishment sentiment.
Yes, so there's a clip that I think is a good illustration of what I'm talking about here and the level it goes. It's the one about nobody in institutions can tell the truth.
And who's speaking this?
Oh, this is Douglas Murray speaking to Eric Weinstein. This is like a British right-wing pundit and the online guru par excellence, Eric Weinstein.
And then you get on to the institution one, which is that nobody, as you know, nobody in an institution now can tell the truth. And it's slightly worse than that, which is that...
I'm used to my saying stuff like that, and then people calling me an extremist. Do you believe what you just said?
Yes, I mean, I don't doubt that there are some...
My phrase is almost everybody, particularly in an institution, is lying about almost everything, almost all the time. That's where I believe we've gotten.
Right.
Wow, talk about some cynicism. I am like, geez Louise.
So this is the distinction from because people are like, well, isn't it good to be, we should be critical about institutions and science as well. There was the replication crisis, the ongoing methodological reforms, and and yes, that's good, but that's not what these guys are talking about, right? That level of cynicism that you're talking about there is much more extreme than that. And I will also point out, just to highlight that hypocrisy is a recurrent feature here. This is Douglas Murray, who recently was embroiled in controversy with Joe Rogan because he was pointing out that Joe Rogan is platforming, people promoting alternative or revisionist histories about World War II, Darryl Cooper, and he made the point that yes, there's issues with institutions, but we do care about expertise, right? And he wanted to make this point around the Israel conflict as well. But compare that to what he said there, right? And this is, yeah, so the ability to completely contradict yourself also doesn't seem to be any objection to people in this field. So that's
Which I'm sure
impressive.
ordinary people who are speaking a lot of times being clipped out of context disagree with oneself. But these are two big core things, which is like we trust institutions and experts or we don't. And it's one of the things that I'm putting together at some point further down the pipeline, talking about Rogan's hypocrisy towards scholars, where he cites scholarship and science all the time, but then he goes ahead and he shits on scholars and scientists, and then he goes ahead and complains why scholars and scientists don't want to come on his podcast. And so it's just like core hypocrisy right there all the time. So yeah, so I think the inability to recognize their own hypocrisy is profound.
Yeah,
in
and
ways.
the other point that I'll make is like one thing that Matt often has highlighted is that in so doing this kind of undermining of institutions, you're leaving people with like an epistemic black hole in a way. Like, well, so who can we trust? And often the answer is, Joe Rogan or the alternative media or whoever the guru figure is. And in the same respect, just to nail down on the hypocrisy again, if there is something from the mainstream media that supports their view, or academia, there's a study or something that they view, they have no issue with like citing it positively, citing figures from institutions that they think undermine vaccine safety or this kind of thing. So institutions are corrupt and lying all the time. You can't trust science unless the particular study or particular figure happens to be useful. And that kind of twin thing about tear down the establishment, the institutions, and set yourself up as the alternative truth bringer. That is the kind of like 1-2 punch that I think is the thing that makes it very harmful.
Yes, I agree. I think that's also it's a very effective rhetoric for them, because you tear down other alternatives and then you get them hooked on their own charisma. And so it's sort of how they build their following in many ways. And it's done through creating this kind of hostility towards other groups, and then charisma and parasocial relationships towards oneself. I would, in this context, I think it's important to play your second clip about the universities. Who's speaking on this one?
This is Eric Weinstein again.
Okay.
So talking about universities and their ability to suppress like interesting ideas.
I think that you, Pia, and myself are indicative of an entire layer of Gen X academicians, and now probably millennial academicians, whose work was suppressed. And we don't feel comfortable saying these words, which is that the purpose of the university system in the time that we were there was in large measure to make sure that big, disruptive new ideas did not upset the apple cart, because there was the ability to deny, this is what you guys call interference competition, which is that you keep people from sitting down in the chairs in a game of musical chairs. And then the idea is we have lovely parting gifts for our contestants.
Ay. This is so depressing.
In that case, it's also worth mentioning, because it will come up again, that is Eric talking about his brother, Brett Weinstein, and his wife, Pia, I think. I forget his wife's name, but she's involved in economics. So he's talking about them all having these ideas that were like kind of suppressed by, academia, which only exists to kind of, strangle revolutionary concepts and novel insights.
Which is the exact opposite of my experience in academia, where novel insights that you can convince your peers of as being legitimate are very much rewarded.
Yes. Well, that actually kind of connects to the next feature, the self-aggrandizement and narcissism, because part of the issue there is like, if you are someone that hasn't like succeeded in a particular discipline, like for example, you are a figure like Eric Weinstein or Brett Weinstein, who do have PhDs, right, and do have like backgrounds at least in relevant fields, but have not had any measure of success, or people have not regarded your theories as revolutionary. So why? right, what is the explanation for that? And one explanation could be that your theories are not that revolutionary or not that well evidenced, but obviously that can't be the case. So the answer has to be that there is a, suppression and conspiracy against you. That's the only reason that it could be that you haven't been properly recognized. So there is often that, like, the gurus have these special insights which their audience will often recognize, but the fact that they are not accepted by the mainstream shows how corrupt the mainstream is, right? Because otherwise they would accept it. There isn't any other option, really. Like, there's no other explanation.
The man is keeping me down, is what it is.
Yeah.
I mean, now look, higher education is imploding. There's lots of really good scholars who are not able to find stable employment due to various reasons. And so I want to make it clear that, like, there are systemic issues with higher education, university structures, and stuff like that. But suppression of ideas is certainly not one that I've seen too much of as something that is impacting people's careers. Yeah, I mean, academia and higher education and scholarship is built upon consensus and convincing your peers. So if you're not able to convince your peers of an idea, then either you need to rethink your idea or you need to rethink how you're communicating it. But if you're going directly to the public in this self-aggrandized way, well, then that's just rhetoric, because you're going to people that don't have the capabilities and experience and expertise to judge your ideas and your communication of them.
This is part of the issue, is that, like, I think if you're somebody with narcissistic tendencies, right? I'm not talking about people that are, like, diagnosed as narcissists, right? Not the clinical definition, but just people that are in their behaviors.
Yeah.
What people, note as, like, narcissistic, self-absorbed and very self-promoting, this kind of thing. And in a lot of people that we cover, what's interesting is they're objectively successful. They're rich, they have huge audiences, they publish books, that are translated and very popular. They're invited to give speeches all over the world, all these kind of things. And yet they're incredibly fragile around, like, any suggestion that, they are not as brilliant as they claim. And they will often, in this respect, reference how many people download or watch or are interacting with their content. So Jordan Peterson once referenced, or not once, he's done this multiple times, but he conflated the number of people who watched his content, so like a video that had 5 million views, as the amount of people that agreed with him. He's like, 5 million people, find this valuable. And sure, like, the majority of people consuming Jordan Peterson's content probably do agree with him, right? Like, that's likely the case. But it's just that thing where, like, there's an automatic assumption that, like, attention being paid proves that they are right. And what very often doesn't filter into that is exactly the point that you made, that, like, you can get attention for promoting, outlandish things or conspiracy theories and
Of course,
like, wild rhetoric, but that doesn't get accounted. It's just like, if you got attention, then that shows that you're right. And that's not the case, right? Like, that is not the case in academia, that just, like, it's or at least it's an ideal that just because you are, like, an influential person with, a lot of attention, you're able to give, like, a keynote speech or whatever, it shouldn't matter if the evidence is against you, right? Like, that's the ideal of academia, and there's plenty of cases where that has proven to be the case. There's actually a clip which highlights the level of self-aggrandizement and connects to the previous one. Is, if you see the one that is about the 3 Nobel Prizes.
yeah.
This is Eric talking about the same 3 people that you just heard him mention: his wife, himself, and his brother. And I think this highlights, like, the level to which they are viewing, the insights that they have and how far they're not being acknowledged.
Okay, let's do it.
It is time to do battle with the oppressive structures that have been used to silence new ideas. If in my family I assert that there might be as many as 3 revolutionary Nobel quality ideas in one clutch, how many ideas might there be suppressed if that is actually true?
There's so much to unpack there. Oh my God, we have to do battle. Okay, within my family, within the clutch, even, like, who's
Yeah, clutch.
My clutch of children are growing into Nobel Prize winners.
Yeah, yeah. So in that, I mean, like, there's a lot done by the heavy lifting of if what I say is true. Right? Like, yeah, hey, big if true, but like, no one on the planet, to my knowledge, there is no family with 3 Nobel Prizes in it. So, you know, Nobel, but this is kind of the
Curie's
funny
got
thing.
2. Is there? Didn't one of their children or grandchildren get a Nobel Prize? Am I wrong? Maybe not.
Oh, okay, maybe I'm wrong.
Here we go. We have like 5
Uh-oh.
of them.
Fact
According to
checking.
Google AI.
Wait, 3
We
people
have
in families?
Marie Curie, Pierre
Oh, wait,
Curie,
in the Curies.
Irene Joliot-Curie, Frederick Joliot-Curie, and then Henry Richardson Labouisse Jr., spouse of Eve Curie. So we're
Okay.
that's some serious.
That is a clutch. I'm like thinking nepotism plays some role in this. I'm just throwing this out to our galaxy community because that seems a high level in one family. But okay, so there's president. That means that.
I mean, to be honest, it's due to 2 different Nobel Prizes that 4 of them shared, and then a 3rd one that eventually came later that was a Peace Prize. So Marie and Pierre shared it in 1903. Marie won it again in 1911, and then
2.
Irene, yeah, she won it in chemistry and physics, and then which makes sense with all the radiation stuff that she did.
Right, sure, it was important. I'm genuinely impressed.
But then Irene and Frederick won it together in 1935, and then Henry Richardson Labouisse won it on behalf of UNICEF. So
Okay.
to a certain
Well,
degree, we can explain away some of this stuff there.
Look, I can still say though that, you know, therefore there's precedent, so we can say that Eric's claim is not prima facie like insane. It has happened before, but even with that, I will say that, like, you know, I'm in a scientific adjacent field, right? But I know scientists. I'm sure you do as well, Flint, right?
I am a scientist. I work in the lab studying
That's
isotopes.
it.
Yeah.
That counts. Can you get Nobel Prizes for archaeology?
Well, there's
Theoretically.
only 2 that have ever been given. One was in physics for developing radiocarbon dating
Okay,
to Willem
that seems
Libby.
reasonable.
The second one was more recently in the field of biology, I guess it was, to Pablo Esponte for decoding the Neanderthal genomes.
Okay, but these are both reasonable things to give people Nobel Prizes for. But
Yeah.
the point I would make here is, like, you know, from my knowledge of academia, most people are not angling for Nobel Prize. They don't imagine that, including the people that win them. They often are, you know, like, they're very happy, but it wasn't they're like, you know, I find an idea. They often, like, you know, focused on the topic and then later became very important, right? Like recently
agree.
was the new vaccine technology, right? And but for the gurus, all that matters, like in science, is kind of Nobel, right? Like, so that's why they're not talking about making a contribution.
It's just a buzzword.
It's a Nobel Prize.
It's just a buzzword like paradigm and da 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 da. It's just
Yes.
it's one of their jargons that people can recognize and not really understand how it works within these actual academic fields. And boom, it lets them speak publicly in this confident way. You know?
Well, the other thing I will point out, so there's another clip I have there that is JPP. This is Jordan Peterson talking about Elon Musk, right? And this is a guru talking about another guru.
Yeah,
right?
there we go.
But I think this is a good illustration of the level of, like, kind of narcissistic self-aggrandizing that goes on, even when it's projected onto, like, other figures that are seen on their side. So, yes, worth a
Yes, sir.
listen.
And his ability to insert himself into these hidden systems is absolutely revolutionary. You know, it's a mythological trope, an ancient mythological trope, that it's the evil brother of the rightful king who is one of the prime enemies of the state. It's the evil brother of the righteous king, and it's the goddess of chaos. Those are the 2 enemies. It's the social structure pathologized or the natural world rebelling. Right, so historic enemies. Well, the evil brother of the king is camouflage and corruption. And what happens as a system develops is that it accretes predators and parasites. That's a biological metaphor. And if the load gets too heavy, the system collapses. And the antidote to that, the Egyptians had figured this out, the ancient Egyptians. The antidote to that was clear, honest speech and careful attention. The Egyptians actually had a god who specified that, signified that. That was Horus, and he was the defeater, the eternal enemy of the evil king. And Musk is playing that role with his engineers. He's in there finding out, like, how much of government spending is wasted. Well, you don't know. Why do you not know? Well, because the government itself doesn't even have the internal mechanisms to track its own behavior.
Oh my God, it just jumps to this very galaxy brained, that's for sure.
Oh yeah.
As well as being, yes, extremely perfectly self-aggrandizement and narcissism right here. I think it illustrates that exactly, where you're basically calling Elon Musk Horus. And of course, Jordan Peterson being the lead priest to identify this.
Oh yes, and Jordan Peterson, actually, that particular clip, I think, is from a video where he compared the entire Trump administration, like Tulsi Gabbard, J.D. Vance, Trump himself, to the X-Men and other heroes and gods. Like each one of them had their own special characteristics, and his channel has like a little video, you know, with them all in superhero costumes. And it's the kind of thing where when you say that, you're like, no, surely not. Like, somebody wouldn't do that. But yes, he did. And yeah, that's normal behavior in the guru sphere.
Okay, so next up is, I guess, grievance mongering. I think that this is an important one. It's one of the lessons that I use when talking to my followers, that as soon as somebody being canceled is good for you. And so grievance mongering is very much playing on cancel culture and the way its role in modern society is, in my mind.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things is that it allows you to present yourself as like a victim, you know, being targeted by others. So you can also prepare your audience. There's a Russell Brand clip that I'll play later that speaks to that, but like, you predict that you will be criticized and attacked, right? And then you are, because you are promoting conspiracy theories or you know, misrepresenting history or whatever the case might be, and then you say, look, I told you they would attack me, right? And
exactly. It inoculates. It's a form of vaccination. Even you vaccinate your followers against the kind of critiques that'll come. Yeah, exactly.
So this is Robert Malone talking to Joe Rogan.
Right.
So for me, the reason is because what's happening is not right. It's destroying my profession. It's destroying the practice of medicine worldwide. It's destroying public health in medicine. I am a vaccinologist. I've spent 30 years developing vaccine, a stupid amount of education, learning how to do it and what the rules are. And for me, I'm personally offended by watching my discipline get destroyed for no good reason at all, except apparently financial incentives and I don't know, political ass covering?
Yep, that's definitely a perfect example of grievance mongering right there, inoculating people against the kind of critiques that's going to hit you, which are hitting him right now, of course.
Well, Robert Malone as well, like, so for your listeners, they may or may not know, but he claimed to be the inventor of RNA technology, right, for vaccines. That is not the case, right?
Talk about self-aggrandizement.
Yeah, he was involved in like one aspect of the technology back in the day, but like he basically represents it that he invented that technology almost single-handedly, right? And actually, if you listen to that Joe Rogan episode, he also claims to have invented a bunch of other technologies, and so it's not enough, right, to have just been involved in RNA. But so Robert Malone's story, and a lot of them, the same as the Weinstein brothers that we covered, it's them personally who have had, you know, the revolutionary theories. Brett Weinstein believes that he has an alternative theory of evolution that's been overlooked. He also has a theory about telomeres and senescence, which means that all drugs in the US are unreliable, right? He also happens to be anti-vaccine. And most of them are also, you know, selling kind of their own alternative system, be it ivermectin related or whatever the case might be, as the solution. So yes, grievance mongering is extremely common, and it pairs nicely with the next feature, which is about cultish dynamics. So there's a clip which is titled "The People versus Goliath." This is Brett Weinstein again talking to Tucker Carlson, and I think it highlights both grievance mongering and cultish dynamics quite well.
Okay, let's do it.
So I call the force that we're up against Goliath, just so I remember what the battle is. Goliath made a terrible mistake, and it made it most egregiously during COVID, which is it took all of the competent people, took all of the courageous people, and it shoved them out of the institutions where they were hanging on. And it created, in so doing, the dream team. Created every player you could possibly want on your team to fight some historic battle against a terrible evil. All of those people are now at least somewhat awake. They've now been picked on by the same enemy. And yeah, all right, we're outgunned. It has a tremendous amount of power, but we've got all of the people who know how to think. So I hate to say it, or maybe I like to say it, but I don't think it's a slam dunk, but I like our odds.
I've never met a more fluent biologist, I have to say.
Yeah, I'd call that the people versus Goliath.
Yeah,
Wow.
Goliath is the name for his shadowy, entity, the globalists or whoever the case might be. But the kind of dynamic that he's highlighting there about like there being a group of good-hearted, clear-thinking, well-motivated people, and an evil, corrupt, lying group of, sycophantic, suppressive forces. That is talking about the gurus, yes, but it also reflects onto their followers, where obviously if you're supporting the good guys, you're part of this movement, for light, for justice, you're saving the world from the cabal of pedophiles, all these kind of things. So it's at once creating this very Manichaean world of the good versus the bad, and inviting people to be part of this heroic struggle against the forces of darkness. And all of those forces just happen to be the establishment, the institutions, whereas all the forces for good are the renegades of MAGA, in this case, as it would happen to be. So the people on the outside are always acting in bad faith. They're always motivated by the lowest motivations, and it just creates a very binary worldview of good people versus bad people, and the good people are their followers and them.
Yeah, and I see why you guys call this a constellation of traits. You can see how they develop from one into another, and there's so much overlap between them and how they're deployed, because this kind of grievance mongering, that relates to anti-establishments, which relates to the creation of a cult around a self-aggrandizing figure, if you see what I mean. And so there's very much this kind of interrelationship between many of these various traits that sort of feed off one another.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there you heard there's obviously conspiracy mongering, right? In the
which is your next trait.
Yeah. But there is a clip which actually also kind of connects the three together. It's from Russell Brand, but it speaks to all of them.
And to see that transparency metastasized into something criminal that I absolutely deny makes me question, is there another agenda at play? Particularly when we've seen coordinated media attacks before, like with Joe Rogan, when he dared to take a medicine that the mainstream media didn't approve of. And we saw a spate of headlines from media outlets across the world using the same language. I'm aware that you guys have been saying in the comments for a while, watch out, Russell, they're coming for you, you're getting too close to the truth. Russell Brand did not kill himself. I know that a year ago there was a spate of articles, Russell Brand's a conspiracy theorist, Russell Brand's right wing. I'm aware of news media making phone calls, sending letters to people I know for ages and ages. It's been clear to me, or at least it feels to me, like there's a serious and concerted agenda to control these kind of spaces and these kind of voices. And I mean my voice along with your voice.
It is not just a cultish dynamic, but it is also very clearly a conspiracy theory right here, where it's a conspiracy against these people, which is an establishment Goliath conspiracy designed to take down their geniuses, if you will.
Yeah, and it can also be one of the things is like, so there you can hear Brand like suggesting that, you know, what we talked about, inoculating the audience, because he's being accused of like serious sexual crimes, right? This is on getting out ahead of that and kind of saying, of course they're coming to attack me for that, right? It's not about the women like, you know, wanting justice for or this kind of thing. It's about like vaccines and stuff, right? And also personalizing the attack, that by them criticizing me, they're trying to attack you, right? And that is very much a motif that you hear. And the other thing that you hear quite a lot of in this conspiracy mongering, so there is on occasion the effort to like conspiracy monger, but while doing it with the security that you're not directly saying that that's what you're saying, right? It's like there's this, Joe Rogan and crew are experts in this regard. They can advance and talk about conspiracies, Graham Hancock as well, but they will then say, well, we didn't actually like endorse that. And if you look in the conspiracy mongering file,
we're just asking questions.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a beautiful exchange between Jordan Peterson and Brett Weinstein where they're discussing hospitals and medicine. Like, are they actually good for us?
I suspect if you did these statistics properly, I suspect that medicine, independent of public health, kills more people than it saves. I suspect if you factor in phenomena like the development of superbugs in hospitals, for example, that overall the net consequence of hospitals is negative. Now that's just a guess, but it could easily be wrong, but it also could not be wrong, and that is a good example, or that's where my thinking about what we don't know has taken me with regards to the critique of what we do.
The fact that it's even plausible is a stunning.
Well, you know, medical error is the third leading cause of death.
Yep.
You know, and that doesn't take into account the generation of superbugs, for example.
Oh my God, you have to be kidding me. That is the most enraging.
No, it could not.
It could be
not wrong.
It's just a guess. It's just a guess. Oh.
Yeah. So that is, you know, this, like you said, these things overlap. So like the conspiracy mongering is often about like them being targeted by, you know, nefarious forces, and it's they'll make reference to like actual conspiracies that happen, you know, the Tuskegee syphilis experiments, for example. Like governments have actually engaged in, you know, clandestine programs and stuff, all of which is true, none of which means that conspiracy theories are valid. One feature being that they're often uncovered by whistleblowers and investigative journalists, never by conspiracy theorists, right? But the other aspect of it is that they basically invoke from the reaction that there's something very, you know, incredible being communicated here. Like if Brett Weinstein isn't there and Jordan Peterson is sitting in a room with another person and he's like, maybe hospitals kill more people, they'd be like, what the hell are you talking about? You know, it's like, have you ever noticed sick people are often at hospitals? And you're like yes, because that's what hospitals are.
Because that's my dad died in a hospital, but he was very sick and ill, like, you know. And I mean, to argue that this stuff is not working, like, all you need is the most basic statistics of the history of medicine to recognize that modern medicine is amazing. It is saving my life right now as we speak, and it is saving many other people's lives, and even the people's lives who are probably criticizing it right now. And it's just, I mean, so
it's worth considering though that like people like Jordan Peterson and Brett are often also like involved in promoting alternative medicine and like kind of anti-vaccine stuff, right? So Jordan Peterson rather famously was put into a self-induced coma, or medically induced coma, not self-induced, but in Russia, because his daughter convinced him to travel to Russia to like engage in an experimental treatment in order to get off addiction to the drugs that he was taking, anti-anxiety, or I forget, benzodiazepine or whatever it was. But so he presented that as well, that all of the medical authorities in Canada, in the US, they all misdiagnosed him. One of them diagnosed him as having schizophrenia, and all of it was like misdiagnosed. His daughter famously advocates, an all meat diet, talks about it being related to inflammation and so on. So he is somebody that, is very skeptical of medical authorities, and Brett Weinstein, one of the leading anti-vaccine advocates in America during the COVID pandemic. So they are these kind of people that undermine things like just belief in medical authorities. It's not just academics, it's anything around public health, any institution. So it's the same motif with the anti-establishment stuff, and it has the potential to be really harmful, especially during a global pandemic where it was very harmful.
Yeah, exactly. This is why this kind of anti-establishmentarianism has real impacts on real people, because they're not going to actually get the medical treatment that they need. And not just during a pandemic, but during ordinary medical crises that occur in the course of one's life. It could be just getting cancer or having an ill loved one. I cannot tell you the number of times when people have said you should take ivermectin for your cancer. And it's just like, or even worse, the number of times where everybody's like, you need to cut out all carbs. And it's like, man, I actually did some research on this. I talked with my doctors and I looked it up. The specific genetic mutation that my cancer has shows that a diet high in protein and fat would actually be bad for my cancer. Even though for some cancers, a diet where you cut out carbs and have mostly protein and fat, it could be good. There's a lot of research that still needs to be done. And that's part of the problem. This research is at its infancy in the relationship between diet and cancer. So we need to wait until we understand how it impacts your specific cancer, not just cancer in general. That's not how we do things.
Sound like someone that's been lied to by big pharma. That's it.
If I was lied to by big pharma,
you think they're trying to keep you alive, Flint?
Chris, if I was lied to by big pharma, I'd be dying right this second, because the prognosis for stage 4 melanoma is like 6 months to a year before new medicines came out, and the medicines are working very well for me. So I have every confidence that I'm not about to die within the next 6 months to a year.
That's great. I'm
that's
glad to
due
hear
big
it.
pharma. So let's instill some trust.
Yeah, I have something that can maybe serve as a palate cleanser, because it's pretty dark territory that they're in, right? And this is often where conspiracy mongering goes. But the next feature around having revolutionary features, you already heard it kind of in the way that Brett and Eric Weinstein present themselves as having developed, Nobel Prize worthy ideas. It's not just that they're contributing to a field. You're a scientist doing work. That's not enough. You have to have an idea that will completely revolutionize a field if it's adopted. But the important
So wait a second. It's not just paradigm shifting in one paradigm. It shifts all 70 paradigms at the same time.
Well, if adopted, it could. Eric Weinstein believes that he has developed a theory of everything that, if adopted, would allow us to travel to, all our solar systems and become multi-planetary. So the level of importance that we adopt their ideas cannot be overstated. Brett's idea would, one, allow evolutionary theory to develop. It's been stuck in a rut, as we all know. And then also that theory alone, that's a separate one about an alternative theory of evolution. But he also knows about all of the things in drug testing. That means that none of the drugs in the US are safe. So if we don't get that sorted, we're in big trouble.
Before you go to your clip, I do want to make one clear point. This idea that science and scholarship is stuck in a rut is far from the truth of how people in the fields believe this. If anything, the fields of Greek archaeology, environmental archaeology, they're moving faster than ever before, with the kind of different ways that we approach things, the new methods that we have, the number of excavations that are occurring. It's above and beyond. It's a period of a scientific renaissance in many ways for many fields. We're worried because of cuts that are happening in America and elsewhere that this period might end. But and there's certain systemic challenges that we have in higher education and science that also are headwinds on us. But overall, the amount of movement and progress that scientific fields are making right now is revolutionary for people within these fields.
Oh, absolutely.
yeah.
I just seconded to point out that, like, if you listen to people like Peter Thiel or Eric Weinstein or various other like doom mongers, they often talk about like scientific progress as if it stopped in 1970s, right? We haven't really made, yes, we've made iPhones, but they're not really, you know, they're just incremental.
Notice how convenient it is that it always stopped from the last time they got their education.
Yes,
so you know, like when they're in high school and college, what they learn, that's what they think is the level of scientific advancement. They have no idea what we're actually doing today.
Well, there's a beautiful point about that, because there is a clip of Jordan Peterson. I don't think I have it there, but it is basically him talking about how all the, you know, all the usual thing, the institutions are corrupt, they're all terrible. Harvard in particular, because this was when the Trump administration is still attacking it, but he was involved with Harvard. So how does he square the circle about, right, Harvard is a corrupt institution? But of course the answer is it wasn't corrupt when he was there. It's become corrupt since he left. So you're exactly right that like it was good, you know, in the past whenever they were involved, but it's become like corrupted since then.
And that might be a criterion you could add to your 12th one is glorifying mythological past.
Oh, yes.
I think they all do that in different ways. And I think that's also one of Umberto Eco's key points for fascism. And so I think there's a kind of relationship there that gurus are going to do. When times were better at Harvard, when it was just the elites like me, the right kind of elite.
That is a recurring motif, that there was like a golden age that we've left, right? And like Peter Thiel in particular, he tends to focus on, there was a time when people were seriously trying to reach immortality, like, you know, that was a goal, and now people have given up.
There was a time they were trying to make gold out of copper too.
Yes. So this, but like you said, I just had the same reaction that, like, you know, in any field you look in, like, you know, phylogenetic analysis, mRNA vaccines, the proton beam therapy, just there's been tons of projects. AIs, right? AIs. Currently, it's revolutionary. It's made a big difference to the way I do research and various things. And all of that is happening, you know, in the contemporary period. But in any case, yes, the image of stagnation is not true. But it is very convenient if you want to present yourself as somebody that, you know, has the ideas, that, and if they were adopted, everything would get better, right? But for that,
I have revolutionary ideas too. They're just, I forget them when I wake up.
Yeah, that's the problem. Well, so a palate cleanser of sorts. If you look at the revolutionary theories, there is one called CL, Cognitive Theoretic Model of the Universe. This is Chris Langan, the self-proclaimed highest IQ individual in the planet, possibly, but at least in America, outlining his revolutionary theory.
Reading Bertrand Russell and Albert Einstein, and it occurred to me, these two things really need to be put together. And then, you know, once I decided that, I started putting them together. And then I found out about Kurt Gödel and the undecidability theorem. And yes, absolutely. Okay, you see, because reality isn't just geometric, which is what Einstein thought it was, nor is it just linguistic. It's a blend of the two, right? Russell saw it as being linguistic. Einstein saw it as being geometric. Okay, so I decided that reality must be logico-geometric, putting the two of them together. Of course, then I realized, well, I've got to put together a theory, construct a theory, in which reality is actually logico-geometric. And so that's where the CTMU came from.
And the CTMU is the Cognitive Theoretic Model of the Universe.
Cognitive Theoretic Model of the Universe.
This is your theory of everything.
My theory of everything, and it's all in the name. If you take a good close look at that, you've got cognitive theory, and of course, you know, a theory is a kind of language, theoretic language, okay? And then you've got cognitive theoretic model, you've got a model, and then you've got universe. You've got a language, you've got a universe, and then the model is the mapping between them. CTMU says those are all the same thing. All of those terms, all of those properties are distributed everywhere over reality. Reality can have only one structure once you realize that and you implement it in theoretical form.
I think what I love most about this clip is that your file name includes the word remarkably stupid.
Yeah, that's editorializing from me. Yes.
Because this linguistic geometric mashup, oh my god, my brain just hurts. It's so stupid.
Yeah, and again, from a self-proclaimed highest IQ individual, who goes on to explain that like this is also linked into evidence that God exists, the afterlife exists, aliens have been visiting the US, and like the government's controlled by, if you follow his online stuff, it tends to be Jews, aliens, and a lot of racism, a lot of strong racism. He's
Wait,
like,
who is this guy again? Who is it?
Chris Langan. Chris Langan. He actually featured in a Malcolm Gladwell book as a like high IQ individual. So yeah, he's
yes, by combining geometry and language to create a model of the universe.
yes. So like a lot of this is based around like the belief that the people themselves has incredible insights, and they are revolutionary thinkers, the likes of with the world has never seen, and they will often directly compare themselves in a way that's extremely on the nose to Galileo. It's like they haven't heard of that many. So there's an actual, Galileo gambit, but that is who they often reference themselves as being, similar to, and similarly will present it that they're persecuted for their ideas. So.
Which, by the way, Galileo was not persecuted by the scientific establishment. He was persecuted by the fucking church. Like, it's a complete opposite.
That was an institution, wasn't it, Flint?
Yeah. But the point being that, like, they're talking about being persecuted as scientists by their own institutions. That's the opposite of what Galileo was persecuted by. He was persecuted by something very different. These individuals chose to disassociate themselves from higher education and academia. So, it's a different scenario. It's an inapplicable analogy.
you might say that, but I'm, it's who can say? So their theories are revolutionary, but they've been suppressed. It falls in with all the other things that we've talked about. And there's an example where actually what the gurus often do as well, interesting Flint, is like while they're good at like invoking conspiracies and stuff, they're also actually often directly stating, what they think, their persecution complexes and stuff. And there's a last clip in this kind of area that I think is worth playing. This is Eric and Brett talking again, but a good self-diagnosis of their psychology.
I think you and I share a certain delight when we do our homework and we discover something interesting and absolutely nobody else gets it. That would feel bad to most people because they would feel like, what am I doing wrong? Why does nobody else understand this point? To you and me, that feels good. It is to know that you have achieved something, you have discovered something, and that nobody else can even recognize it. Gives you some sort of sense of how far ahead you might be.
What is the point of discovering something that nobody else can recognize? Like, what the hell? That's like the opposite of what discovering something is. The point of discovering something is to be able to share your discovery with others.
Well, in their case, they will be vindicated. You will be presented, just like Graham. Eventually, Flint, when the evidence emerges, you'll be discredited and they will be seen as revolutionary geniuses who were ahead of their time. So that's it. But just that comparison of like, when everyone is telling you that you're wrong, for other people, when they're saying all the evidence doesn't support your claims, for other people that might make the question, like, am I potentially wrong? But in their case, it's just evidence of how far ahead of everyone else they are. So yeah, that's to me was a very revealing clip.
And it also, again, ties in very well to how they both inoculate themselves and build themselves up and tear down other groups and institutions. It's this trifecta of doing those three things constantly in many of these different criteria all at once. Yeah.
Yes. And so there's the next characteristic is like the Cassandra complex, and this is like that they are able to predict the future. They're warning people about impending doom. This kind of is a good partner to what you talked about, you know, that there is a golden age in the past. It's like now we're living in Mappa, you know, the end times. And very often, you know, the dark forces are there, they're ready to destroy society, but there's a brave gang of defenders. And the only hope is if we can deal with big archaeology or Anthony Fauci or whoever it is. And again, you know, when we originally made this, Matt was talking about it because, you know, he was saying they fit the kind of Cassandra archetype quite well. And then, as often happens, the gurus themselves went on to directly compare themselves to Cassandra. So there's a clip with Brett Weinstein and Jordan Peterson, with Jordan Peterson talking about how he relates to Cassandra.
Here we go.
So maybe not, but you know, I have some of the abilities of Cassandra. Cassandra was a seer who was fated to be entirely accurate in her predictions. Her torture was that no one ever listened to her. So I don't have that problem because people do listen to me, but I do have some ability to see down the road to where things are going. I mean, I'm optimistic fundamentally. I certainly do believe that as a species, we're on the cusp of we are on the cusp of a potential prosperity and realm of possibility that's unparalleled.
Talk about right nail on the head, right? You know.
Yeah. So that I was very pleased when he.
I know. I can imagine you calling up Matt and being like, "Guess what I just found."
Yeah, and it's you know, so it is always there is a nefarious group. It ties in with the conspiracies, but in that case as well, Jordan Peterson. The whole point of Cassandra, as far as I understand the myth and legend, is like she had the ability to see the future, but also the curse that like nobody would heed the prophecies, right? But Jordan Peterson compares herself to Cassandra, but then it's like, but everybody listens to me, so he has all of the abilities, but none of the flaws. So it's just incredible that like, you know, we heard him compare Elon Musk to an Egyptian god. Here he is compared to a mythical figure, and they're referencing Goliath and Galileo, and it's always like that, and it speaks to like the self-aggrandizing nature. Like this is why I'm skeptical about using their techniques against them.
Well, we'll talk about this. Even this one, I think, has its uses. But I do think that I do think you guys need a 12th thing about building myth in some way. And I think it also actually debunks your term secular gurus, because I think they incorporate a lot of myth and spirituality, especially in the jargon and languages and analogies that they make.
I've got a beautiful illustration of that, and that relates to their tendency towards neologisms and sort of profound bullshit, which is the next characteristic. And in that case, like in many respects, Eric Weinstein is the prototypical like secular guru, right? And he has coined, for example, the distributed idea suppression complex, the DISC, the gated institutional narrative, the GIN, like the DISC protects the GIN. This is all things that people like. And if you remember the fellow Jordan Hall, who was spinning the 90 paradigms.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a conversation he was having with David Fuller, a journalist for Rebel Wisdom, a kind of alternative media channel. If you play that clip, you will hear exactly what you're talking about, like the love for metaphor and analogy and kind of jumping between topics with linguistic fluency.
There was a thing that had a vital essence to it that eventually showed up as gatekeeper, and probably many other things. Curator's probably a subset or a sub-species of the same higher order thing. Many of which became corrupt, of course, and became exploited and gamed and whatnot, as they tend to. The inquiry of, okay, what is this new thing? How do we go back up into the most vital center and then come back down? Can't be gatekeeping. That implies things like gates. And of course, gates are around territories. And territories tend to be civilization, cities, castles, protected things. But boundaries,
different idea, right? A boundary is a different idea than a gate. A gate has a strong enclosure that has only one specific opening, very narrow, very well guarded. And then there's some very simple process that allows things to come and go, right? A cell membrane is very different. Maybe that's a better metaphor. What does it mean to actually build a boundary, a membrane that has the ability to selectively bring in the resources that are necessary and appropriate for the vital health of the interior while keeping the toxic components out and recognizing that we are no longer individuals?
That is insane in the membrane. As
Can you, Flint? I have a question for you. I think it would be hard in general, right? But can you guess what he's talking about there? Like, you don't have the context for the conversation. So, like, what's this in reference to? What would you just hazard a guess?
Well, it sounds like what he's trying to do is justify gatekeeping on his side to some degree. So what would that be about? Like, you mean like a specific like news event is what you're saying?
Oh, no. That's not bad. That's not bad, actually, because he just is waffling through different metaphors. But what that conversation is actually about is conversation about conversations, which is a very common thing in the alternative media space.
Conversation about conversations.
And it happens to be a conversation that he had with an avowed neo-Nazi, anti-Semitic guy, and the journalist is kind of criticizing him for having that conversation without warning his audience about the anti-Semitic nature of the guy that he was talking to. And part of this conversation is, well, you know, how to have a conversation with a neo-Nazi and like take in the, you know, the positive but leave out the bad bits, a cell membrane, a gate. Should we talk about a castle? And I feel like the emphasis is on the analogy as opposed to, you know, the basic issue.
Substance.
Which,
yeah,
which is like, is it good to be platforming
So
strongly?
his point is, no, it's
people?
fine because I didn't want to gatekeep a neo-Nazi. I wanted to cell membrane them.
Yes, although he also does wax poetic about like creating a third entity in the conversation, like a kind of union, like a slug, you know, the way they mate. So it's your point about like mythical language and religious and spiritual, but it's often around the most mundane things. And I do take the point that they often reference like spirituality and religion and the insights from, you know, Lao Tzu or whoever, right? Like these kind of historical figures. But I think the other clip is a good illustration of like the more common variety that it takes.
Now, if you ask me what's going on with geometric unity, I can say something very simply that because you have a very large viewership, will go out to many people. You won't understand it, but it'll be over very quickly, and it should be an astounding comment. If you take a Lorentzian metric as a section of a bundle of pointwise Lorentz metrics and pull back the positive Weil spinors with suitable passing to maximal compact subgroup, you get one generation of Petit Salam grand unified fermions. Now, that was very quick, but what it really just said is that general relativity knows the standard model. Anybody of Schwann's ability should be able to parse that 20-second sojourn and say, is that something we know? Is that something that might be interesting? Then what we'll have is we'll have the typical physicist large language model conversation in which physicists will ask, do you have a new prediction at anything at electroweak scale? Which is a question that doesn't get asked to the string theorists.
Oh my God. This reminds me of Graham Hancock's pyramid math, which I demonstrated to Rogan quite clearly could be used for any numbers.
Yeah.
It's just dazzling with technobabble.
Yes. And in Eric's case, there actually is like at least a semblance that he knows, you know, what the concepts mean, like to a certain extent under it. But the whole point of that, like you said, is it's performative, right? Like it's like the difference between referencing a scholar whose idea you want to acknowledge because it's relevant to the topic versus dropping in lots of like, you know, obscure references and linguist or literature references so that you can show that you're a well-read Renaissance man or whatever the case might be. So that's the difference. And I think that like with Jordan Peterson and stuff, he's a deeply, deeply religious man, but he also will constantly invoke Jungian interpretations and psychological, and it's very much like it's less on like revealed truth as more like revealed truth via modern insights from science, from evolutionary biology, from archaeology, this kind of thing. But you're all right that they will often make reference as well to ayahuasca trips or insights gleaned from, you know, introspective practices or so on. So there isn't like a completely hard line that they won't reference
I mean,
religious
I
kind of
agree
source
with
of
you that they
knowledge.
are secular by and large, though there is this shift towards Christianity lately.
Oh,
But
yes,
but they are secular, especially in their foundations. But I think that, there's the way they glorify the past and the way they dabble in these spiritual and mythological tropes is something there that I think could use some more thought even from my perspective as a historian. It's something that I notice a lot with their language.
Just when you mentioned it, I could put a folder with like, you know, 50 clips of people.
Ooh, let's do an episode on your podcast where we'll introduce the new criterion.
Yeah,
That'll
so
be a fun one.
it is a recurring motif. Even like figures like Nassim Taleb, who are in other respects like, but they still harken back to, you know, the people in the past knew things, and the same way when you'll often hear, even though there is like an ethnocentrism to things, when they're referencing, you know, Native Americans or people from non-Western cultures, it often is a kind of idealized, you know, Orientalist presentation that there is like ancient knowledge or they were at one with nature, whereas, you know, in the West we've lost that insight. So it's the like healing the ills of Western civilization model. Like Jordan Peterson has an interest in Indigenous Canadian populations, but it's very much around, you know, that kind of idealized presentation of them as a cure for Western ills.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think in that sense, of course, it blends very nicely into number 10, which is excessive profiteering. And as we've seen, especially with the wellness industry, the cures for modern ills, that is what they're going for, whether it's just listening to their mantra or whether they're actually selling pills as actual cures for modern ails.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you get a lot of supplement shilling amongst these people, and there are cases where people don't need to do it, like Peter Thiel and Elon Musk are billionaires, right? You won't hear them supplementing, like selling supplements directly because they make money in other ways, right? But the majority of them are willing to do that, and they are willing to do things like on Patreon, for example, charge £212 for a monthly hangout. Brett Weinstein does that, and you know there's ways that, like, you know, all content creators and whatnot are engaged in some ways, and, you know, building communities and people, including academics, including public intellectuals, are selling books, you know, promoting ideas. They might have merchandise for different things, not academics usually, but, you know, people that are online creators often do. And there's no issue with that. The reason we called it excessive profiteering is because it's like a level of profiteering which is beyond the ordinary. I would put in this, like, I don't think in many respects that Steven Pinker fits the template of a secular guru very well. I think he more is like a public intellectual figure. But an example of excessive profiteering would be when he minted an NFT of his belief in free speech and then sold it for like $1,000, which came with like a Skype call to him. Like, that would be excessive profiteering. So
yeah.
That kind of thing where you're like, is that something that, you know, normally you would think? And Jordan Peterson, you know, he has business branded courses after him. He now has a online Peterson alternative to the university. They often have these like alternative institutions or courses or whatnot, and they're often highly exploitative in, you know, the marketing and promotion of it. So it's all based on like cultivate the power of social relationship and exploit it for maximum profit. And there are plenty of content creators that do that ethically, and, you know, they have of course parasocial relationships are sort of inevitable in the modern like ecosystem. We have a Patreon, we have people that support us, but there's a way that you can do that which is not like exploitative and kind
Let's
of
get there in a
people's
second.
fear.
That's where we can talk about, I think, how to learn from these some of them, not all of them, in an ethical sort of way. Yeah.
I have a nice little clip that speaks to this, the kind of distinction that I think you will not hear Flint Dibble doing. I hope not at any point. So the one clip that said excessive profiteering is a good illustration.
I own a very comical book, The Collected Poems of Donald J. Trump, available for purchase at the Daily Wire website, by the way, which compiles his most memorable tweets and declarations from 2009 to 2019 into beautiful library edition hardback form. It is a ridiculously funny tome. I believe that deeper consideration of this proclivity for the viciously funny is also useful in shedding more general light on Trump's admittedly complex personality. First, we should fairly note that dictatorial types, a category which his enemies insist he falls into, are generally not known for their sense of humor. People were imprisoned in the Stalinist Soviet Union for being the first to stop applauding after a speech by the great leader. Criticism was absolutely out of the question, and certainly not forthcoming from the top. I've also never encountered a compendium of the witty and amusing things said by Adolf Hitler or Fidel Castro or Chairman Mao. Trump.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
So to be clear, he's selling a book of leather-bound book of Donald Trump's tweets. You know.
Oh my God. Oh my God. I've learned so much. Like, for one, I actually did not realize that many of these gurus were actually so strongly supportive of Trump and MAGA.
Oh, yes.
I actually did not know that, to be honest, because I don't follow them so closely. I follow the pseudo-archaeology ones, which some of them are and some of them aren't. Most of them are, but not all of them. And yeah, that is just selling out. It's just selling out 100% into this thing to profit off of the lowest effort possible of just getting a few tweets and printing them in a book. Like, I have to give him some credit, though. He's very consistent in his ability to tie all these things together. One sentence he's profiteering, in the next he's promoting your leader, in the third he's promoting himself, in the fourth he's criticizing leftists. And so it's just like all within one little 1 minute bit, he's able to do all this stuff all in one bit. It's just so
that is
impressive.
true. There is skill involved, and there is a reason that a lot of these people are so popular, right? Because this is part of what makes them interesting to us. Is like they are very skilled in like the Tegan quote. They have a very particular set of skills, and they make themselves terrible for people like us. But it is a set of skills nonetheless, and
and they're good at it, and they know how to keep their eye on the bottom line. Like Hancock, one of the things I'm impressed with him on, he goes on Rogan all the time, and no matter what Joe asks him early on, he's very quick at them promoting his book that just came out. He knows how to immediately turn it, because he knows that most people are seeing the first 5 minutes and then they might tune out. So you want to get that plug in right away. So he knows to do that. He's a businessman, and he's a good one at it.
Well, there's a skill to doing that naturally, because I've seen people go on Rogan and attempt to do that, and it comes across very badly, right?
He does it in a way that comes across very naturally, very innocently. He's very good at it, and all of these, I'd say the top level gurus, they're very good at what they do, and of course a lot of it is designed towards profiteering, because they need to, as you put it, exploit social relationships very clearly, and sell their stuff. And to do this, of course, you just added a new one: moral grandstanding. So you are still updating your things. Explain moral grandstanding to me.
Well, so moral grandstanding is like a concept that philosophers were talking about. There's a reference there to Ossian Wormke's book, but it is basically where moral language is used and a pose of high moral virtue, but it is primarily used for self-aggrandizing, right? A holier than thou is probably the way that you would present it, but it basically comes in the form around the gurus that they're always motivated by the highest good, right? Like they're concerned with totalitarianism. They're trying to like promote world peace. They want to, enlighten the people that have been cast aside by academics and looked down upon by the elites in society. They're always doing things with the highest motives, and that means that their criticism and attacks at them are like attacking a good man, right? Like somebody who's trying to do good for people. And all of the clips that I've played, they're all from men, right? There are women. We have covered women, but I will say that this is very strongly gendered in the favor of men. I don't know if it's good for men. It's not. I would say not, but it does tend to be like male dominated, this space, and I think that is no just happenstance. It's probably part of the characteristics and the like the kind of politics that often get promoted around here. But yes, so in any case, there's a thing that we've also talked about, like the wounded bird pose, where you will have people like Lex Friedman talking about how he's going to be attacked. People know his heart. He loves everyone. He'll often speak about how much he loves everyone, and yes, that in attacking him, they're really attacking the chance for world peace. So if you want to hear an example of that, the one called Maximum Martyrdom is a good illustration. This is following on the back of his conversation with Zelensky about Putin.
Even if the heart boils over with hate, leadership now requires sitting at the negotiation table and compromising. This may be painful, but it is necessary. There are a few other places in the conversation where some online mobs took my words out of context and used them to call me naive and to call for more war, saying peace is impossible with a man who they claim is the second coming of Hitler. My friends, if you make such attacks on this conversation, it is in fact you who are naive and ignorant of the facts of history and geopolitics. Peace must be made now, in order for death and suffering to stop, in order for Ukraine to have a chance to flourish, and in order for the drums of a global war to stop beating. A global war that would cripple humanity. This was my goal. Once again, to push for peace. And I will continue this effort to the best of my ability. Thank you. I love you all.
Oh my God, Lex. Oh my God. This is a topic that's near and dear to me because I actually spent 3 summers working in the Crimean Peninsula when I was like about 20 years ago. And so I understand the situation in Ukraine and Russia very well because there were tensions then already, especially in the Crimea, where a lot of Russian-speaking people were living, but also a lot of Tatars and a lot of Ukrainian-speaking people were living. And so it was such an ethnic mishmash, and there's tensions there with that. And so, for example, one of my good friends, the archaeologist Anton Smirnov, he passed away in the war. He volunteered to fight. He was my age, and he fought, I guess, for about a year on the Ukrainian side until he died in combat. And so it's something that's near and dear to me, and it's something that, as you know, I've had words with Lex online, where he does not show any love towards me at all. He invited me on his show, and then he ghosted me. He would set something up, and then he just ignored me for 6 months. I asked him for 2 updates. He ignored me, and then the next thing I know, he has Graham Hancock on the day before Ancient Apocalypse Season 2 comes out, where they spend significant time bashing me. There's a whole segment just bashing me, and he sets up Hancock to do that. And then no response from Lex. And then I called him out on this on Twitter, and he's like, "You should do better, Flint." And it's just yeah.
That's tough love, Flint. That's tough
well,
love.
I thought it was funny. He wrote this really long thing to me. We'll put it up on screen. And I replied, and I was like, "This is not true because of XYZ." And his response was to immediately delete and block me. And and it's like, that's not tough love. That's just, I'm going to insulate myself from valid critique.
Oh, well, I wasn't going to say it, but I think it's worth playing. You see the other clip that's in that box, the Lex Friedman one? So this is Lex responding to critiques he received about the way that he interviewed Zelensky and the bias he showed to Putin. But I think it's interesting to hear the way he frames it.
But online, on the interwebs, I saw a lot of attacks, sometimes from swarms of online accounts, which of course makes me suspicious about the origin of those attacks. One of my friends in Ukraine, who by the way thinks the attacks are all propped up by Ukrainian bot farms, said there's no need to say anything extra. Let the interview stand on its own. Just keep focused on the mission of pushing for peace. Basically, he's a Ukrainian version of my other friend, Joe Rogan, who to this day says, don't read the comments. This is generally good advice, and I try to follow it. But I'm also a human being. I wear my heart on my sleeve, and this interview, this war, for me, is deeply personal. And the level of vitriol, misrepresentation, and lies about the conversation and about me personally was particularly intense and disingenuous. So I thought I would use this opportunity to say a few words, just speak a bit more about how I approached this conversation with President Zelensky and conversations in general.
Yeah, you mean you approached it by speaking Russian when you could have spoke English with him. Which is just deeply insulting.
Yes, after publicly requesting that, right? Not privately requesting that. And I mean, one of the aspects that I just wanted to mention was Lex was criticized by identifiable Ukrainians.
Of course.
Right? And Russians, right? Like Gary Kasparov and various people, Ukrainian activists who are identifiable. But in Lex's framing, it's Ukrainian bot farms, which I've never even heard of. Ukraine. Like the bot farms are in Russia. That's Russia.
I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if there's Ukrainian bot farms, but at the same time, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about identifiable, real Ukrainians who criticize this situation and his handling of it, which was, like I said, from my understanding of politics in Ukraine and Russia, which I have familiarity with to some degree, he handled that in an extremely insulting and biased way that was very obvious to anyone who understands the situation there.
But it's always presented in the same with his interactions with you, that it's because he's trying to do things right, he's motivated by good things, and when you present any counter narrative to that, it reveals that you're like a bad faith actor, right, who's only interested in self-promotion or this kind of thing, right? So it's like a very clear double standard. And I mean, there's much worse examples of moral grandstanding, but Lex is a repeat offender in this domain. So that's it. And it kind of couples well with the notion that your enemies are bad, they're evil, they're the dark forces. So any attack on you is an attack on good people everywhere and your audience. Convenient.
I think that makes sense. All right, well, let's look at a couple of these charts from gurus that you've decoded before we move on to maybe thinking about what we could learn from them. So Eric Weinstein seems to be someone who shows all of these traits in a very strong way, with the exception of profiteering, which he shows in a strong enough way to profit from it, but not in like such a crass profiteering sort of way.
Yes, I mean he did sell like supplements and whatnot when he had a podcast, but the point is that he stopped doing his podcast for some reason. He did work for Peter Thiel as like managing director of one of his investment companies, so I don't think he's hurting for money, but it's the fact that he kind of stopped profiteering from a very popular podcast, which made him unusual in that respect.
Yeah, and maybe not doing it as such a crass, obvious way as selling a book of Donald Trump's tweets or constantly pawning supplements, that kind of thing.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
But everything else, yes. I will say with Jordan Peterson as well there, although he looks slower, we've since rescored him for the most recent year, because this was a conversation I think he did in 2018, or was the one that we originally looked at, and we take the score from the content that we looked at, right? Yeah. So he was less then than he is now, but I mean he still is up at the tippy top, right? Like, so now he's up with Eric. He's up. I think he's even actually higher than Eric. He's now transcended. But at that time he was still, this is still a very respectful scoring.
Yeah, that it is. And then we have Joe Rogan here at some point, a different version of this kind of meme. But yeah, he's obviously very much a guru on a lot of these things.
Yes, surprisingly so, because I think a lot of people don't think of Joe Rogan himself as like a guru figure, right? They see him as a conduit for others. But if you listen to Joe's content, like in long form, he has very clear ideas.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
I hope my last video on Joe Rogan makes that point, that he has his ideas that he promotes, and he chooses to promote them rather than just being a conduit for others.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And this treatment of you and Graham Hancock highlights, right, like the difference, right, in treatment, the ideas that he wants to spread. But in all the things like conspiracy theorizing, self-aggrandizing, all these kind of things, like Joe has them in spades. So yeah, he is high, and I think deservedly so.
I agree, fully agree. And then of course we talked earlier about Gwyneth Paltrow, one of the few women in the space.
Yes. So she doesn't, like, because she is more in the health and wellness space, she scores high in a couple of areas, right? But I think she is more prototypical for people that are active in like health and wellness and alternative medicine spaces. And there is overlap with like the modern guru template, but that's why she doesn't score as highly, I think.
I think that makes sense. So to go into someone like Carl Sagan, so here you have him as high on galaxy brainness, which is obviously because he talks on a lot of different topics confidently. And then you have him at a 2 on Cassandra complex. I'm guessing that's just because he warns about issues that are going on in the world in the future.
He was doing that at the time. So this was in the content we looked at, which was like this specific speech that he gave. And
okay,
he wasn't like, it's at 2, right? Like the Cassandra complex for a reason. Like he was, I believe he was talking about like kind of impending doom and whatnot, but in a reasonable way, you know, like it was related to things, but it did have like just an element of that kind of ability to see things that others can't. But yes, it was about things which are much more reasonable to be concerned about, to be fair.
Yeah, and that's actually what I think is the important thing to realize, at least in my mind. If we go back to your 11 traits, part of my argument would be that some of these, taken in a moderate way, are actually a positive for trying to do education, particularly in the internet sphere. Because part of the problem is if you haven't noticed, Chris, as an academic yourself, it's hard for educators and scholars and scientists to actually get their point across in the public internet sphere. We're not very good at dealing with algorithms. We're not very good at recognizing how podcasters and the media are going to clip us out of context. We're not very good at building parasocial relationships, at least most of us are not. We're very much shut out and locked out of public discourse, is at least one of my big grievances, let's say, is that higher education as a whole, the point of view of most of my colleagues, I'm assuming across disciplines even, is fairly much absent from public discourse, and very often we are portrayed in a very straw man, straw woman sort of way, where what actually is going on in higher education is not accurately represented by others in the media and social media. And I think that's a problem. I think that builds strong anti-intellectual and anti-science sentiment across the world. And so one of my main goals of starting a YouTube channel or even going on Joe Rogan was to try to represent fairly, hopefully, the point of view of higher education and of scholarship and of stuff like that in a nuanced and ethical way, but one that could hopefully be heard. And I assume you guys, in the success of your podcast, that should hopefully be one of your goals as well.
Yeah. So the thing that I would say though there is, like, I agree with almost everything that you presented, probably all of it, to be honest, about, like, you know, the dangers of not being involved in online conversations and misrepresentations of academia that are very prevalent, right, and need to be countered. I think, though, my concern is that I agree that academics that want to make that effort should be supported and encouraged to do so, right? But there are plenty of people in academia who aren't really, that way inclined. They're not likely to be great public speakers. They might be great researchers and whatnot, and that's fine. I think that's fine. I don't think everybody has to be a science communicator, but
I would never say that either. Yeah.
Yeah. So in some respect, like, I think it is good if we get more support for that outlet and like get it recognized as an important thing for people to do, but not like in a one size fits all things. And then the other thing is, I'm very acutely aware, in part because of the replication crisis and my interest in open science and that kind of thing, that the presenting of academic ideas in a palatable format, in a like way that is digestible and appealing to mass audiences, can lead to TEDification of ideas, right?
And lead to what?
TED Talks.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Where ideas are presented in that kind of bombastic way that this is revolutionary. Every academic idea is kind of parceled up as this, personal story and all these kind of things. And people did that, and it worked, and it was very gripping, but it also led to things like power posing becoming the most popular psychology talk, when the evidence base for power posing sucks. And when I think of people like Milo Rossi or CoffeeZilla, or those YouTubers that are doing critical investigations and doing it well and engagingly, or in your content as well, it makes it clear to me that you can do that, but you don't have to. For me, there's the kind of slippery aspect of like the dangers of TED or that.
So let's go through this. Let's go through this list, because actually there's some that I would get rid of immediately. Revolutionary theories is one of them. In fact, when I go and I talk at universities about public engagement, what I try to convince my colleagues to do is don't engage the public with your research content, engage them with your teaching content. Because as soon as you start doing the research content, it's embedded in this discourse, and it's very difficult. It's at the cutting edge of the field, so it's building upon centuries of knowledge that is difficult to communicate across. B, you're going to come off as a little bit too much of a revolutionary. It might not be stuff that's consensus anyway, like you said, the power pose and stuff like that. So you're trying to frame your own research as consensus when that's not quite been decided yet. So instead, what I try to argue when we communicate with the public is we should be communicating our teaching content, the material that is what we teach in our introductory university level courses, right? So I would actually say revolutionary theories, get rid of that when you're communicating with the public, because I think it creates that TEDification that you're talking about. I would certainly say we need to get rid of anti-establishment sentiments. As we see, I think we both agree that's the most dangerous. I think we need to acknowledge the challenges and issues with higher education and scholarship and whatnot. So maybe we'll be at a 2 there, because we might sometimes want to talk about the replication crisis or issues with publication and shit like that. But I think in general, we're trying to promote these institutions and education and scholarship. And then at the same time, but some of these other ones, so some of them, I think, if we want to cut through the noise, we need to embrace a little bit of clickbait and drama. Drama and personal connection is what builds a parasocial relationship, after all. And having been engaged in a lot of drama, I've seen that the drama is what gets clicks and gets people paying attention to you. And so the question is how to walk that line, how to have that kind of your personality present, how to have a little bit of drama and saying, hey, academics are being canceled because we are, after all, but without playing that too heavily, that cancel culture and grievance mongering and self-aggrandizement. But I would say there needs to be a little bit there. If you look at social media influencers, they're all a little bit narcissistic. You're tweeting your opinions on Lex nonstop and they go viral. And, that's just life on social media. We're all going to be at least a little bit narcissistic if we're going to break through the noise, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, so I think the thing that I would say to that is, like, of course, you're right that, like, there's a particular style with, like YouTube thumbnails or whatever that like will get more engagement and you can make like a really good video that's full of like great information on the topic, and it just get lost in the sea because you didn't want to, like, make a thumbnail that would be more gripping for the algorithm. That I think is a genuine thing that you have to like consider, right? Like if your goal is to reach more people, and it doesn't mean like selling out to do it, right? Like it's just simply engaging with the ecosystem that exists rather than like the version that you would ideally like in your head. But with that said, I do think that the danger with like leaning into that in any shape or form is very high, because I've seen